Hogwarts, Harley from the Which Way by author Shimo Nuha Lie. Chapter 391-400. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. 391 This family can't live without Hagrid. After the class, Professor Trelawney finally understood what it meant to be drenched in sweat. To fool Umbridge, she even used the knowledge she had stumbled upon in the Muggle book. Fortunately, Umbridge was probably really fooled by himself, and even developed some respect for him. This made Trelawney feel both tired and somewhat happy. She made up her mind to rummage through her bookshelf after this class. Professor Trelawney bought a huge pile of obscure and difficult books from a Muggle stall to fill his bookshelf, intending to use them to refute anyone who questioned him. If I remember correctly, those Muggle second-hand books, such as Thick Black Theory, Guiguzi, Danyangzi, and Red Zhang Leota, were all placed in the same section of the street stall as the Dao Te Ching. If I were to carefully read through all these books, I would surely gain a lot and be able to continue fooling Umbridge. Professor Trelawney even thought with a smug smile that perhaps Umbridge had a keen eye, and had truly realized his talent. When the time comes, Umbridge and Professor Dumbledore can mention it, and his salary, which hasn't changed in 19 years, should be able to get a raise. Professor Trelawney, who never goes downstairs, firmly believes that as long as the Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic speaks up, a raise for him is just around the corner. Of course, if Professor McGonagall, who is in charge of managing salaries, heard this idea, he would only scoff and think that Trelawney was indulging in wishful thinking. Trelawney once predicted Professor McGonagall's death, believing that Professor McGonagall would not live to graduate. After being signed by Professor Dumbledore, Trelawney boldly predicted that Gryffindor would go 10 years without a title. Professor McGonagall remembers all the predictions Trelawney made. Professor McGonagall isn't petty, but you're a divination class. The professor made so many false predictions that never came true, and he still wants a raise. Dumbledore stopped me from having my wages deducted. And who is Umbridge? While Professor Trelawney was having wild dreams, Umbridge was also lost in thought. Overall, Umbridge was quite satisfied with the course. Although there were many problems and doubts, Trelawney probably has real talent and ability. Umbridge decided to refrain from making any comments for the time being, rather than reporting to his superiors, and instead wait and see. Time flies, and October passed in a flash amidst raging winds and rain, and before we knew it, it was the eve of Halloween. However, the festive atmosphere of Halloween this year was not as strong as in previous years. Students felt that something was wrong, as if something was missing. After much thought, I realized that there were so few pumpkins for Halloween this year. In previous years, a large number of amazing giant pumpkins would appear in the Great Hall, either hollowed out and hung from the ceiling or lying on the floor. Numerous exquisite pumpkin lanterns will also appear as decorations in various corners of the staircase, on the helmets above the corridors, and on the tables in the Great Hall. But now, all of that has disappeared, leaving only the pumpkin pie, pumpkin porridge, and pumpkin tarts on the table. There are no pumpkin decorations at all. What kind of Halloween is this? Now that we've identified the problem, we need to find the cause. The students discussed it and realized that there were so few Halloween pumpkins this year because Hagrid's hadn't appeared in Hogwarts for a long time. In previous years, Hagrid was responsible for growing large quantities of pumpkins to supply Hogwarts. Only he would secretly use some expansion magic on the pumpkins to create giant pumpkins that could be used as carriages. Hagrid has been missing since the start of the school year, so naturally they can't provide pumpkins anymore. While the school will purchase a batch of pumpkins as ingredients as usual, forget about making decorations out of pumpkins. The original text even skips over this Halloween entirely. The author read it several times but never heard of it. This shows how important the Hagrid is to Hogwarts. This made the little wizards inexplicably miss Hagrid. Although most students disliked Hagrid's class on protecting magical creatures, and disliked the ugly and dangerous creatures that Hagrid often showed off in class, such as the blast-ended Scroot, the venomous horned beast, and the Manticore weakened version. However, the students still have a very good impression of Hagrid herself. He provides decorations for the Hogwarts for every festival, always helps the professors with their work, and is generally responsive when little wizards ask him for help. Hagrid has become an indispensable part of Hogwarts. This home cannot be without Hagrid. Although everyone is very saddened by Hagrid's passing, the holidays will still be celebrated. Moreover, although this year's Halloween lacked decorations, the festive atmosphere wasn't drastically weak. After all, there's still Slughorn at school. Professor Slughorn. The professor has always loved to enjoy himself and likes to befriend talented wizards, incorporating them into his network. The best way for these talented wizards to get to know each other is undoubtedly to hold a banquet. Slughorn. When the professor was still the dean of Slytherin College, he would personally fund a Christmas ball every year, inviting the little wizards he considered talented within the school, as well as outstanding individuals from other schools. Since the Halloween holiday isn't that long, it's impossible to have such a grand celebration, so Slughorn the professor simply suggested a costume party. Since the start of the semester, Professor Dumbledore has been extremely busy, traveling all over Europe and Great Britain, often disappearing from the university. He has also, reluctantly, handed over almost all of his principal powers to Deputy Principal McGonagall. But how could Dumbledore possibly miss such an important holiday as Halloween? And Slughorn. Professor Dumbledore approved the activity without hesitation, even though it seemed very interesting. Upon hearing the news, the little wizards, who had been somewhat dejected, became excited again. However, the exciting activities take place in the evening, and daytime classes cannot be skipped. This morning was divination class, which is Umbridge's favorite course to audit, but she was absent today. At the same time, Professor Trelawney's mental state was clearly not right. She appeared worried and would occasionally mutter to herself in a dramatic, low, trembling voice, which was very concerning for the professor's mental state. Based on the snippets of information Professor Trelawney occasionally utters, it can be inferred that Umbridge has likely sent her an investigation notice. Despite Professor Trelawney's rare effort and considerable time spent reading Muggle's books, he ultimately failed to fool Umbridge. After all, the Muggle books she was reading were contradictory to each other, and some parts were incoherent. If one can truly understand The Red Boss, or any other book, then Trelawney could probably completely confuse Umbridge. However, given Trelawney's own mediocre level of expertise, coupled with his clearly inadequate literary skills in translating books, it's wishful thinking for him to truly understand the text. To think that one could learn and master all this knowledge in just 1 month, to the point where it's enough to fool people, is simply a pipe dream. After being misled for 2 whole weeks, Umbridge finally discovered many inconsistencies and, out of skepticism, began to press the issue step by step. Ultimately, she concluded that Trelawney was most likely a fraudster with no real skills. Since he's a fraud, things are easier. Even if Umbridge really fires Trelawney, he'll still be in the right. After reporting to Lord Voldemort and Fudge respectively, she issued her first probation notice as a senior investigator. This is also why Professor Trelawney's mental state is extremely abnormal today. Although the students didn't know the details, they all had a general idea. However, apart from a few devout believers, the other students did not seem to sympathize with her much. After all, who doesn't know that Professor Trelawney is a notorious conman at Hogwarts? Can you believe a single word of her courses? Finally, after the divination class ended, almost no one lingered, they rushed out of the classroom like lightning. Divination class is the last class this afternoon, so everyone needs to get back to their dorms as quickly as possible to do their makeup and attend tonight's Halloween feast. Harley didn't linger outside and went straight back to the common room. The common room in Gryffindor was a mess, but the little lions were incredibly excited. To Harley's surprise, she noticed Hermione and the Weasley twins huddled together, seemingly discussing something. Taking advantage of Hermione's inattention, Harley charged forward with the ball and slammed into her, her chin landing on the back of her messy brown hair. She subconsciously took a deep breath, a scent of oranges. I wonder when Hermione switched to a new shampoo. Harley clearly remembers that the old shampoo smelled like lilies. But orange flavor is fine, the citrus scent is so pleasant, no wonder it's my Hermione. Harley, Hermione exclaimed first. What are you 3 doing, sneaking around like that? While restraining Hermione's struggling hands, Harley glanced at the round cookies on the table between the 3 of them. Canary egg custard biscuits. No, they seem to have been modified. No wonder he's the champion of the Triwizard Tournament. Fred nodded. This is a brand new product based on the canary egg custard cookie, Toad Cookie. Exclusively endorsed by Umbridge. Harley blinked, looking at the Weasley twins expectantly. We all know that Umbridge has been causing trouble at the school lately, George said with a serious expression. Although she only targeted the elective course professor. That's because the greasy old bat beat her so badly she ended up in the hospital, where she was bedridden for 2 weeks. So her flying style can only be used in elective courses. The Weasley twins, singing in unison with dramatic intonation, enumerated Umbridge's sins. Finally, the 2 of them said in unison, ... Given that during this period, the pink toad has been disgusting students at school, causing them mental discomfort and also making the professors unhappy. So we decided to give her a little Halloween surprise. So how did you convince Hermione to witness your prank? Normally, she should have complained to me, the perfect. Harley released Hermione's hand, but still hugged her from behind. Hermione no longer offered any weak resistance, though a hint of resentment lingered on her face. I don't know anything about Umbridge. I'm just watching Fred and George's activities out of boredom. Hermione's entire body was soft, except for her mouth, which was hard. However, Harley was used to Hermione's stubbornness. She simply made a subtle, inconspicuous move, and Hermione immediately surrendered. Okay, I confess. I just can't stand Umbridge's bullying and unreasonable behavior in the digital divination class, always picking on Professor Victor. Hermione chose to tell the truth, so I'm here to help Fred and George with a little bit of work, to help them with their transfiguration issues. They designed this cookie entirely based on the canary custard cookie, but the canary custard cookie's feathers would fall off in a minute. We want to turn Umbridge into a toad, preferably for more than an hour, but unfortunately we haven't succeeded yet. Your original spells were for bird feathers, not toad skin. Harley explained the academic mistakes the three had made, while simultaneously pulling out a wand. This involves a concept in human transfiguration. I suggest you go back and refer to the third section of your 6th grade textbook. I won't be teaching you anymore. I can fix this minor issue, but don't you guys think it's a bit boring to simply turn Umbridge into a toad? How so? George asked with interest. Do you have a better idea? Before he could finish speaking, a red light struck the cookie in front of him. The cookie trembled for a moment, then fell silent. Let me think about it. Harley pondered for a moment, and then 5 or 6 beams of light of various colors shot out from the wand. All done. Now it's perfect. Harley clapped her hands, admiring her masterpiece. What effect will this cookie have now? Fred poked the cookie with the wand, and sparks suddenly flew out of the wand, startling him. It's a secret. Harley grinned mischievously and pulled Hermione up. Anyway, as long as you can get the cookie into Umbridge's mouth, you can enjoy a wonderful scene. Gentlemen, we'll be going now. Girls' makeup takes a lot of time. Fred and George exchanged a glance, shrugged helplessly, grabbed their cookies, and headed out of the Gryffindor common room. The two of them needed to make some preparations for tonight's fun. 392 wishing Pink Toad and Minister Fudge a long and happy marriage. 5K. The decorations for the Great Hall tonight for Halloween were extremely perfunctory. Professor McGonagall conjured up a few fake pumpkin lanterns and hung them on the ceiling, while Professor Flitwick used magic to create a bunch of floating skulls and bats, and that was it. It can only be said that Hogwarts, professors rely too much on Hagrid. Without Hagrid, they suddenly don't know how to decorate for the holidays. The Great Hall was very poorly maintained, but the students dressed up with unusual seriousness. When Harley and Hermione finished their makeup and arrived at the Great Hall, it was already packed with people dancing wildly. The little wizards used their imaginations to dress up as all sorts of monsters and demons. Thanks to the Triwizard Tournament held just a year ago, in addition to the competition among the warriors, the foreign wizards who were not selected also had many exchanges with the students of Hogwarts. Therefore, not many students chose to dress up as traditional vampires or ghosts. Instead, many monsters, especially those from the country where Mahoutokoro lived, became the students' preferred choices. Surprisingly, the portraits Professor Snape hung in the classroom were actually the little wizards' favorite makeup templates. After overcoming their initial discomfort, the little wizards suddenly realized that the miserable wizards in these portraits were the perfect subjects to imitate. Thus, one after another, extremely pitiful decorations were created, which made the professors frown, while the students felt quite pleased with themselves. However, Harley seriously doubted whether some of the students who attempted to use magic makeup were courting disaster. Looking around, she saw at least 10 cases of people who had applied transfiguration to themselves, only to have the transfiguration fail. These students probably haven't realized the seriousness of the situation yet, and still seem cheerful, showing off their new outfits to their friends. But when they got back to their dorm and tried to remove the magic from their bodies, well, Harley couldn't even imagine how miserable it would be. Harley wore only a little makeup today, playing the role of her colleague, the famous assassin leader, the Old Man of the Mountain. She donned a long black robe, with the goblin dagger, usually hidden in her sleeve, tucked into her waistband. Her long black hair was styled into a bun, secured with a silver hairpin, the end of which was a small, flaming skull. Harley was wearing a silver skull mask that covered her entire face, with wispy blue flames rising from her eye sockets. This made Professor Snape, sitting in the faculty section, frown repeatedly. Damn it, weren't Lily's emerald green eyes beautiful enough? Why did she have to go for this flashy blue flame look? Out of sight, out of mind. Anyway, Harley was still wearing a mask and hadn't revealed the face she inherited from Lily. So Professor Snape chose to look away, silently fuming. Hermione, however, was focused on her studies and didn't prepare in advance, so her outfit was rather perfunctory. She changed into the same robe as Harley, wore a bird-beak mask, and carried a tattered lantern conjured by Transmigration, making a cameo appearance as a medieval bird-beak doctor. As soon as the two sat down, two ghosts wearing white coats approached them. "Does Peeves know you two are doing this?" Harley knew from the moving sounds that the ghosts were the Weasley twins. She looked at their outfits with interest, and asked with a mischievous grin. "If he notices your appearance, you're in for a rough time this semester." Fred and George sewed the white robe and bed sheet together and then modified it. So the two of them looked like normal ghosts, but their heads were a size larger than usual. The cloth piece covering the head was magically transformed into Peeves' facial features, with only 2 holes cut out at the eye area so that Fred and George could see outside. "How is that possible?" Fred snapped his fingers. "He has already given us permission to use his image. In exchange, we generously gave Peeves a toad cookie so he could prank Umbridge." George said smugly. "Anyway, these were prank props that Peeves asked us for, saying they wanted to give Umbridge a welcome ceremony. It has nothing to do with us. The Great Hall quickly filled up, and all the teachers were in place. Even Professor Trelawney, who rarely left the attic, made a rare move to come down and walk around. Actually, she hadn't really thought about Halloween. After all, Professor Trelawney was notoriously socially awkward. But now he has no choice but to step down. If Umbridge really fires him, Trelawney will feel like he has nowhere to turn to cry. Thinking about his future, Professor Trelawney decided to make his presence felt one last time, at least to make Headmaster Dumbledore aware of his existence. Currently, there is only one person missing from the entire Hogwarts team, Umbridge. However, no one cared about that, since pink toads are not popular. If she doesn't come, everyone will suffer less from nausea and their appetites will be better. What a wonderful thing that would be. Professor Dumbledore didn't seem to care and immediately announced the start of the dinner. The food this year was as delicious as ever, and the various activities were also very interesting. Slughorn the professor proactively suggested several interesting activities, and Professor Dumbledore immediately agreed. Perhaps sensing that Dumbledore was too tired lately, Professor McGonagall unusually refrained from offering a strong rebuttal and tacitly approved of these activities. Everyone was happy, and laughter filled the air, but the happiness didn't last long. Midway through the banquet, the doors of the Great Hall suddenly opened, and Umbridge walked in with a smile in the cold wind. Presumably to coincide with Halloween activities, she wore cat earmuffs, which are often given out at Muggle Amusement Park, and also wore a pink cat costume. This caused Professor McGonagall's expression to change drastically, and he almost unleashed a curse upon him. Today, to match the event, she even dressed up as a giant tabby cat. Disgusting. Umbridge is in an exceptionally good mood right now. She just went to Hogsmeade to send a letter to Fudge to report on her work, saying that she has been working hard recently and that she is about to fire a professor personally recruited by Dumbledore. Of course, considering the recent political climate within the Ministry of Magic, Fudge will likely be laid off in the next few days, and it's uncertain whether he'll be able to fire Trelawney himself. If Fudge really steps down early, then I can take the opportunity to cancel the punishment, thus offending neither side. Umbridge thought he had played his cards well, so he had a big smile on his face. After realizing that her appearance had attracted everyone's attention, her toad-like face transformed into a blooming chrysanthemum. To show her approachability, she even patted a Hufflepuff next to her who had just sneezed several times. Little wizards, Head tells the other person to wear thicker clothes and keep warm. Little wizards looked mournful. If you hadn't suddenly opened the doors to the Great Hall, would I have been sneezing so much from the cold wind? And you pink toad, where are you taking pictures? Help, I'm not clean anymore. Umbridge put on a little show before striding confidently onto the teacher's bench. I'm so sorry, dear Professor Dumbledore, Umbridge said in a sweet, cloying voice. I had some things to do earlier, so I couldn't come to the Halloween feast right away. It's all right. Professor Dumbledore nodded to Umbridge without changing his expression. Welcome to the team. I was just telling Minerva a traditional joke, and you're welcome to listen. Umbridge's smile vanished instantly. After all, she had spent 2 months at Hogwarts. Although Dumbledore didn't come to school much during that time, Umbridge still got to experience Professor Dumbledore's classic old-fashioned jokes. The joke was so lame that even Professor Flitwick, who has the lowest threshold for laughter, could only manage a couple of forced laughs. I'm so sorry, Headmaster Dumbledore. I really would like to hear you tell a joke, but you are so popular and surrounded by people, I'm afraid I won't have a chance. Umbridge quickly said this, while trying to walk towards the end of the teacher's seating area. But Professor Flitwick, on the other side of Professor Dumbledore, preemptively jumped off his chair, snapping his fingers to levitate his plate and cutlery. Oh, Ms. Umbridge, since you enjoy listening to Professor Dumbledore's jokes so much, I'll certainly give you that opportunity. I happen to want to talk to Professor Babbling about those ancient spells, so this spot is for you. With that, Professor Frivy disappeared in a flash, leaving Umbridge standing there bewildered. It took Umbridge a while to come to his senses. He glared fiercely at Flitwick, who was already sitting next to Professor Babbling, and gritted his teeth in anger. She already hated mixed-race goblin and mixed-race giant, and now she hates these inhuman, ghostly things even more. Once Lord Voldemort rules the British wizarding world, she'll surely become Minister for Magic. Then she'll definitely enact laws to wipe out all these filthy, half-breed creatures. However, he couldn't easily show his anger yet, so Umbridge sat down in the empty seat left by Frivy, forcing a smile as he prepared to listen to Professor Dumbledore's deadly jokes. She had to listen, clap her hands, and laugh along with it. While Professor Dumbledore was drinking honey pumpkin juice, Umbridge hurriedly wanted to eat something, as she was really starving. Just then, a large plate of freshly baked cookies appeared in front of him, and Umbridge picked up the top one without thinking. These cookies are delicious. Umbridge took a big bite, squinted her eyes, and exclaimed sweetly, while stuffing the rest of the cookie into her mouth. Oh, really? Professor Dumbledore picked up a piece with interest. Let me try the house elf's technique. Time flew by, and the banquet soon came to an end. After the ghosts performed a deathly symphony, adding to the eerie atmosphere of Halloween, Professor Dumbledore intended to announce the end of the dinner. But suddenly his expression changed slightly, and a ball of fire appeared in his hand under the table, along with an extra feather. Excuse me, I must take my leave, Professor Dumbledore said softly, while giving Professor McGonagall a wink. Professor McGonagall instantly understood what Professor Dumbledore meant and nodded without making a sound. Umbridge narrowed his eyes as he watched the subtle interaction between the two. However, considering her current status, she didn't feel comfortable asking. The students didn't notice Dumbledore's departure, they were still discussing whether the previous music could be more eerie and better suited the Halloween atmosphere. At this moment, Professor McGonagall stood up and gently tapped his throat with his wand. I'm sure everyone enjoyed the wonderful Halloween feast, but happy times always fly by. Now I must announce. Professor McGonagall was about to announce the end of this year's Halloween feast when her words were interrupted by a loud croaking of a frog. She looked angrily toward the source of the sound and saw Umbridge sitting there. Umbridge looked at her hands in horror, they were now covered in pink bumps. She suddenly swelled up, her whole body size increased significantly. Ururich's head also turned into a pink toad's head, and webbed feet grew from between the fingers of his hands. However, her body still retains a human body, only the skin under that pink dress has turned into a pink, smooth skin covered with bumps, like a toad. Umbridge screamed in terror, but his screams were mixed with quacking sounds. A bag of candy slipped to the ground, it was the last treat Umbridge had eaten. In an effort to build connections, Umbridge has always claimed to have Selwyn family blood. The Selwyn family's magic candy shop in Diagon Alley has always been a regular source of dessert for Umbridge. A tiny hand quietly grew out of the ground and tossed a half-eaten chocolate into the candy bag. Of course, no one noticed this scene, everyone was focused on Umbridge. Unfortunately, the attention this time didn't bring Umbridge the same positive feeling as last time. I need to go to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. Umbridge screamed and tried to run towards the side door of the Great Hall. But after running a few steps, her eyes suddenly became blurry. Umbridge suddenly forgot what had happened to him or what kind of environment he was in. She felt that her surroundings had changed, turning pink and with hearts floating around. At the same time, a man suddenly appeared in front of Umbridge, her current official superior, the British Ministry of Magic. Minister Fudge. Minister Fudge. Although he didn't know what had happened, Umbridge immediately and skillfully put on a fawning expression. Unfortunately, something seemed amiss. As soon as she opened her mouth, she suddenly realized that she had fallen deeply in love with the man in front of her. Despite the fact that the man in front of him was short and fat, with an oily face and thinning hair, he was the type of person I disliked the most. Although I like fair-skinned, delicate young men, preferably with a youthful face, fair skin, and a very gentle voice, Cedric from Hufflepuff is my favorite type. But sometimes, fate is just that wonderful, isn't it? Hearts welled up in Umbridge's eyes, and he couldn't control himself as he lunged forward, hugging Fudge tightly. He then strained his voice, trying his best to speak in the sweetest, most sickeningly sweet voice possible. Minister Fudge, I think I have fallen deeply in love with you, with everything about you, with all of you, with everything about you. It's obvious that Umbridge's literary skills are lacking, he only knows a few phrases over and over again. But Fudge gently embraced Umbridge and said softly, "Oh, I love you too, dear Dolores. Do you know why I transferred you to my side as the senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic? It was so that I could be closer to you." "Really?" Umbridge's surprised and loud voice echoed in this pink world. "Minister Fudge, you promoted me and made me the senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic, was it so that you could get closer to me? I knew it. The love between us is so genuine. Ah, I am so happy." As he spoke, Umbridge closed his eyes, pouted, and waited for Fudge's next move. Unfortunately, she waited for a long time, her lips were numb from pouting, but she still didn't see the scene she had imagined. Umbridge opened his eyes with displeasure, wanting to see what his new lover was up to. But when she opened her eyes, she was startled to find that the person in her arms had somehow become her master. Lord Voldemort stared coldly at him, his two narrow nostrils pointing directly at him, which startled Umbridge. Umbridge quickly knelt down on the ground, his obese body arching up like a real toad. "Master, my respected master, please forgive my disrespect." As she spoke, she repeatedly kowtowed and tried to crawl forward, attempting to lick Lord Voldemort's shoes. Lord Voldemort did not speak, but simply raised his wand, a piercing blow. A crimson beam of light erupted from the wand and struck Umbridge. Umbridge was immediately covered in cold sweat and trembled all over. In other circumstances, she would probably scream and curse, while rolling around on the ground several times. However, considering that the user of Crucio was Lord Voldemort, Umbridge not only dared not scream, but also had to endure his weakness and pain to loudly thank Lord Voldemort. "Thank you for the punishment, Master. Thank you, Great Master. Strangely enough, I usually become completely powerless and collapse to the ground after being tortured by Crucio for a minute or two. But now," Umbridge wailed for a full 10 minutes and still felt like he had inexhaustible energy. She noticed this keenly and suddenly felt a little puzzled. At that moment, Umbridge felt someone tapping her on the shoulder, and she immediately flew into a rage. Now it's the Dark Lord punishing himself, who dares to disturb the Dark Lord's enjoyment. Others might be courting death, so don't drag them down with you. Umbridge blurted out his thoughts without thinking, "Get out of here. Can't you see the greatest master is punishing me?" She clearly felt the hand on her shoulder disappear, and just as she was feeling relieved, she heard a cold voice say, "In that case, let's not disturb Umbridge. That's quite elegant of a senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic. Wishing Umbridge and Minister Fudge a long and happy marriage. 393 The Broken Time Turner and the Stolen Death Chamber." Overall, this year's Halloween was quite interesting. From the costume party to the various performances and activities during the banquet, everything left a deep impression on the Little Wizards. The Little Wizards had a wonderful time and even wished they could come back every year. But even after so much time has passed, if those who experienced it firsthand were to choose, the most unforgettable and memorable performers would undoubtedly be Umbridge. There was no way around it. After all, the incredible thing Umbridge pulled off at the end of the dinner was simply too outrageous. In the eyes of ordinary little wizards, this is what they see. At the end of the banquet, Umbridge suddenly transformed into a half-human, half-pink toad monster, or rather, she revealed part of her true form. After all, Umbridge already looked quite similar to a toad, even more toad-like than a toad. After revealing his true form, Umbridge initially wailed that he needed to go to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries for treatment, but he stopped halfway there and started acting crazy on the spot. She stood there like a madwoman, shouting her opinions on the Minister for Magic. Fudge's love was revealed to everyone with a pleasant surprise. It turned out that Fudge made her the senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic because Fudge loved her. After performing the disgusting kissing act, Umbridge started a new trick, kneeling on the spot and loudly thanking his master for the punishment. The younger students were a bit stunned, but many middle and upper grade students, who were going through puberty or even adults, instantly understood what Umbridge meant. Goodness, I never expected Minister Fudge and Senior Deputy Minister Umbridge to have such a complicated relationship. Moreover, judging from Umbridge's practiced and repeated shouts of, "Thank you for the punishment, Master," Umbridge and Fudge have probably played this role-playing game quite a few times. This sounds very interesting, but given Umbridge's appearance, the students only regret that they know so much. Adhering to the principle that one should not be the only one whose eyes are hurt and whose heart is polluted, The story of Umbridge and Fudge was quickly spread by knowledgeable students. Immediately, wails erupted again in the Great Hall, and many people wished they could have ears they had never heard before. This also taught those students who asked questions out of curiosity a lesson: don't ask so many questions next time. The professors, however, had no time to consider what the students were thinking. All the professors of any caliber were huddled around Umbridge. It should be some kind of transfiguration. Professor McGonagall pointed at Umbridge with his wand and chanted the spell for a while before making a preliminary judgment, his tone even sounding somewhat doubtful. It feels similar to human transformation, but not entirely. It should also incorporate other transformation magic, such as some knowledge related to animagus. The user deliberately left the spell in a semi-failed state, causing an irreversible situation. In addition, there were some spells that I couldn't understand. To be honest, they've been teaching Transfiguration in Hogwarts for 39 years, and I've read through all the books in the restricted section on the same subject, but I've never seen any similar magic. And there's the smell of a curse, Professor Flitwick added. It looks like an instantaneous curse, allowing these transfigurations to coexist and remain stable. In addition, she also has a spell on her body that was created by modifying Legilimency, but I can't see the specific effect. We've found the source of these magic spells, Professor Sprout's voice suddenly came through. This was the last food Umbridge ate. This half-eaten chocolate is covered with a lot of spells. That makes things easier. Professor Flitwick took the floating chocolate and carefully refrained from touching it. Once I find the item that contains the magic, I can break the spell on it. Then wake Umbridge up first, otherwise what kind of image would it be if she kept wailing on the ground like that? Professor McGonagall made his decision and then looked at Slughorn. Professor Horace, could you help calm the students down? Oh, of course, I'd love to. Slughorn the professor clapped his hands, and the sound echoed throughout the Great Hall. Please everyone quiet down and return to your seats. The professors need to deal with Ms. Umbridge first. With the help of the student council presidents and the prefects, the noise in the Great Hall subsided, leaving only a buzzing of whispers. The illusion magic on the toad biscuit isn't difficult to deal with, it's just a simple combination of legilimency and illusion. Magic can extract certain figures from the depths of the mind of a subject with weak willpower, thereby creating a corresponding illusion. Professor Flitwick, a master of spells, quickly found a way to break the spell and remove the magic. However, Umbridge was still immersed in the pain and pleasure of being punished by the Dark Lord, so he immediately started swearing. This caused Professor McGonagall, who was trying to wake her up despite feeling nauseous, to instantly turn icy cold. In that case, let's not disturb Umbridge. That's too kind of you, Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic. Wishing Umbridge and Minister Fudge a long and happy marriage. Upon hearing this, coupled with a flood of memories suddenly rushing into his mind, Umbridge's brain instantly went blank. It took Umbridge a long time to get his thinking working again and slowly figure out what had happened. It seems I've been trapped in an illusion, and under its control, I've said many outrageous things and done a lot of things I shouldn't have. In the instant that he understood everything, Umbridge let out an extremely miserable scream. Upon discovering that he was still the pink, half-human, half-toad figure, and that all the students below were staring intently at him, Umbridge promptly fainted. There's nothing I can do if he doesn't faint, so many people are watching. Even if Umbridge had the thickest skin and the best mental fortitude, he wouldn't have been able to stay sober under these circumstances. Of course, Umbridge could choose to play dead and get away with it, but she couldn't interfere with other people's actions. On the ceiling of the Great Hall, a beetle keeps changing angles to take pictures, with a quill pen and a notebook floating behind her. The quill pen frantically scribbled and drew on the notebook, almost sparking. Umbridge became famous, but in the way she least wanted to be. Rita suspended her serialization of the novel about Harley in the newspaper and, as instructed, began reporting on Umbridge's brilliant performance at the Halloween feast, accompanied by numerous photographs. This caused an uproar throughout the wizarding world. After all, the fact that the Minister for Magic and the Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic were openly having an office romance was a topic of great interest everywhere. More importantly, the two main characters in the story seemed to be playing a very elaborate game, even using words like master and punishment. When Umbridge saw Lord Voldemort in her hallucination, the students had no idea what she was seeing. All the little wizards knew was that Umbridge first confessed his love to Minister Fudge and then shouted for his master. Given this series of performances, how would you judge any other wizard? It's impossible to defend them, not even the most professional online trolls could. In an instant, Fudge's approval rating plummeted by a third, leaving him with less than 25%. Moreover, his approval rating is declining, making him look increasingly dangerous. However, Fudge no longer needs to care about his approval rating, because Wizengamot has officially passed the second impeachment appeal. They now have the right to remove Fudge from office at any time and elect a new minister for magic through a general election. Fudge's continued tenure can only be attributed to his extreme luck. On the very night that Hogwarts held their Halloween feast, a group of mysterious wizards invaded the British Ministry of Magic. With a clear objective, they stormed into the Department of Mysteries, destroyed all the time turners, and looted some ancient magic items being studied in the Death Chamber. The other wizards' target was the Minister for Magic's office, where they destroyed 3 entire cabinets of files. These wizards were very familiar with the internal structure of the Ministry of Magic, and even knew the exact location of each department within the Department of Mysteries. It should be noted that most employees and even senior officials of the Ministry of Magic are unclear about the structure of the Department of Mysteries. Even Fudge, the Minister for Magic himself, cannot say exactly which 12 departments there are. Only the unspeakables know the inner workings of the Department of Mysteries, how to find the right way to their destination through those 12 constantly rotating black doors. As is well known, the unspeakables have all signed a pact with an ancient magic item in the Department of Mysteries, preventing them from revealing the secret. Anyone who dares to challenge that magical item or try to leak its secrets will be annihilated by an unknown force the instant the secret is revealed. Of course, there is another way to avoid this, which is to have the intruders follow behind unspeakables. I don't know what the judgment principle is, but this situation does not count as unspeakables actively disclosing information and does not violate the contract. And Great Britain indeed, there are some unspeakables in Wizarding World who have resigned or betrayed the Department of Mysteries, and some have even joined the Death Eater. However, all the wizards who invaded that night did so with their faces exposed. All witnesses confirmed that there were no unspeakables among these wizards, and the Department of Mysteries, Guardian Magic also confirmed that none of them used Polyjuice Potion or Transfiguration. After completing these tasks, the mysterious wizards left without any trouble. The Ministry of Magic employees were unable to inflict any harm on them. Instead, several Aurors were seriously injured and admitted to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. Professor Dumbledore left the dinner early that day, without even having time to announce its end, just to deal with the series of events that had occurred at the Ministry of Magic. Thanks to these wizards, Fudge doesn't have to step down for the time being, and can even retain a small portion of his power. One reason is the destroyed documents. Some of these documents were not important, but they were highly confidential and could only be accessed and recalled by Fudge himself. Ministry of Magic needs Fudge's help to restore these files as much as possible. On the other hand, Fudge needs to communicate with ministers for magic in other countries as quickly as possible. After all, there couldn't possibly be so many completely unfamiliar wizards in Britain, they could only be from abroad. Even if we change the minister now, without holding an election and directly appointing Amelia, the head of the Magic Legal Affairs Department, as minister, it would still take 3 days to legally complete the process. Even with Fudge's verbal assistance after completing her post, Amelia would not be able to easily become familiar with everything about foreign countries, making it difficult to coordinate with other ministries of magic. In this emergency, the British Ministry of Magic couldn't wait any longer and had no choice but to reluctantly allow Fudge to remain in office for a while longer. Fudge was also very willing to help in this matter. After all, given that he was already destined to step down, the difference between getting a political advisor position or completely leaving the British Ministry of Magic after stepping down was quite significant. The former allows him to access politics he enjoys, while the latter, well, for Fudge, might as well just die. As for the rumors about me out there, did they matter? No, at least not right now. These rumors are unimportant to Fudge, but extremely important to Umbridge. After all, Fudge could at least offer a defense, saying it was all Umbridge's fantasy, but Umbridge was a party directly involved in the incident. She couldn't explain everything, since, based on the existing evidence, her grotesque state and previous erratic behavior were all due to the problematic candy sold in the Selwyn family's candy store. Various malevolent spells and transfiguration were found on the half-eaten chocolate. Logically, with conclusive evidence, everything should be settled, and Umbridge could easily file a lawsuit demanding compensation from the Selwyn family. However, Umbridge dared not do so. After all, she was of mixed race, and the implicit condition for becoming a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Magic was being pure-blooded. In order to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Magic, Umbridge concealed the existence of his Muggle mother and squib brother, and used a small sum of retirement money to force his elderly father to leave the Ministry of Magic and move to Europe. She also claimed to have the blood of many pure-blood families to prove her nobility, thus trying to do as well as possible in the extremely ancient and corrupt Ministry of Magic. After that, no one knew Umbridge's origins. Even if someone mentioned the janitor with the same surname Umbridge in front of Umbridge and asked if the two were related, Umbridge would only sweetly deny it and insist that she was only related to the noble pure-blood family. The Selwyn family was the family with the best relationship with Umbridge, and Umbridge went to great lengths to get them to acknowledge him. Even though Umbridge is now a senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic, would she dare to cause trouble for her biggest financial backer? She wouldn't. She could only admit that it was her magic that went out of control by accident, and dared not say that it was the Selwyn family's candy that was the problem. In that case, Umbridge could only lie alone in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. Of course, this might still be a good thing for her, since she won't have to appear in public for a long time. Despite lying in the hospital, Umbridge wasn't doing nothing. She continued to communicate with her owner. After the initial communication and the lengthy punishment imposed by Crucio, Lord Voldemort didn't seem to be in such a bad mood, and his tone was relatively calm. At least you're not completely useless, are you, Umbridge? At least you've figured out that Trelawney is a useless fraudster who can't tell prophecies, and you've sent out Ashte for review, notice before leaving Hogwarts completely, thus gaining Fudge's trust as much as possible. In that case, our plan can still be completed. Master, is Fudge still the Minister for Magic? I remember he was about to step down before I was admitted to the hospital. Umbridge's voice revealed a sense of bewilderment, yet also a mixture of joy. Recent newspapers are filled with news about him, seemingly to make Umbridge completely socially dead. Fudge was extremely busy during this time, and in order to avoid suspicion, he did not contact his old subordinate. Therefore, Umbridge knew absolutely nothing about the Ministry of Magic. No. Lord Voldemort's cold voice rang out again through the dark mark. Although he's a piece of trash, and most Death Eaters are trash too, I'm not entirely counting on them. Someone pulled some strings to keep Fudge in this position until at least Christmas, so that our plans can be completed smoothly. Great Master, do you mean I can continue to contribute my strength to you? Umbridge's voice was filled with surprise. It wasn't that she liked the job, but if she could no longer serve Lord Voldemort, then given Lord Voldemort's personality, she probably wouldn't have any value in living. Work hard, Lord Voldemort said meaningfully, without giving a direct answer. You can contribute far more to me than you can imagine. After I have accomplished my goal, your name will be remembered forever, and you will receive my favor in a way you cannot even imagine. 394 Slytherin's Great Library Quidditch Tournament Limited Edition. After Halloween comes November, and the weather quickly turns unusually cold. The sky turned a pale blue-gray, and the mountains surrounding Hogwarts were once again covered with thick snow. Every morning when I wake up, there is a layer of hard frost outside the window. Even with magically enhanced windows and walls blocking the way, just looking out the window is enough to send a chill down your spine. So the goblin blanket, which had been destroyed, was revived. The howling wind outside seemed to be able to cut the exposed hands and cheeks, so what was there to do outside? Everyone thinks the dorm is pretty good. Maybe one day we'll have to get up, but it's best not to do it now. But when something else happened, even the coldest winter and the most terrifying goblin blankets couldn't dampen the little wizard's enthusiasm. The school's Quidditch competition was about to begin. The Halloween performances at Umbridge are a thing of the past. Now, discussing the Quidditch competition is the new trend at the school. Considering that in the past 2 years, this year and last year, the Quidditch teams of all 4 colleges have seen a number of key players graduate and replaced with many new players. In addition, Hogwarts hosted the Triwizard Tournament last year, so there was no Quidditch tournament. Therefore, the Little Wizards were particularly enthusiastic about this long-awaited competition, and 2 weeks before the competition, they started discussing which team had a chance to win the championship this year. Needless to say, Gryffindor received the most votes, and even many Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw fans favored the Gryffindor team. After all, Gryffindor only changed one goalkeeper this year, and they also have top-class chaser Harley. Although this goalkeeper Ron is terrible, he clearly lacks confidence, and it feels like if he misses even one ball, it will trigger a chain reaction and cause the team to collapse. But that doesn't stop Gryffindor from being incredibly aggressive. Leaving aside others, Harley has proven that point countless times on the field. If you can't even hold off a 3-on-1 defense on the other side, they really don't know how to play. As is customary, the first match will be between Gryffindor and Slytherin. I don't know if the professors get bored that these two teams play the first game every year. Harley always felt that if she were in charge of organizing the competition, she would choose to play a double round-robin format and schedule the 2 colleges for the last match. By this time, the entire season had been played, and both teams' players were in top form. Add to that the traditional rivalry between Gryffindor and Slytherin, the outcome of the first round, and the subsequent heated exchanges between students, and that made the match truly exciting. Unfortunately, Harley is not yet the principal and does not have the authority to schedule matches, so he cannot make such adjustments. However, she had already planned it out. Once the old order was fulfilled, she would return to inherit the position of principal of Hogwarts. Wouldn't that be wonderful? At that time, she could control the entire large school. Time flew by and the day of the competition arrived. The day before the competition, it was snowing heavily, but today, fortunately, the sky was clear and blue. The players from Gryffindor Quidditch team arrived at the Great Hall early, and everyone seemed to be in good spirits. After all, since Harley joined the team, they have won 3 consecutive championships and established a dynasty. So what if our old captain and best goalkeeper has left the team? As long as Gryffindor's sharpest spear is still there, everyone will still have the confidence to win the championship. Now, the opportunity to win 4 titles is right in front of me, and I must consider whether this is my only chance in this lifetime. To forge the glory of Gryffindor is our inescapable duty. Ron was probably the only one on the team who didn't seem to be in a good mood. During this period, in addition to the team's regular training, Fred and George also gave Ron special training. However, Harley strongly suspected that their training session was somewhat influenced by personal feelings, and that she went a bit too far, destroying Ron's confidence. Ron's face was now deathly pale, his eyes were glazed, and the hand holding the sandwich was trembling constantly, looking like he was suffering from pre-exam syndrome. Sometimes he would inexplicably blurt out, "I was so stupid, really. I knew I was useless, I was good for nothing, I couldn't play basketball at all, so why did I join the team?" The Weasley twins sat beside him, comforting their younger brother with their arms around his shoulders. Ginny was also trying to persuade Ron across the table, but it seemed to be to no avail. "He looks like he's trying to drown himself in his bowl of cereal," Hermione couldn't help but remark. Harley shrugged. It seemed that Gryffindor's defense was probably unreliable today. After all, we have to give newcomers a chance. We can't expect them to carry the whole team right away, can we? That's true. Hermione sighed. As a little lion with an extremely strong sense of college honor, she was even more eager to see a 4th consecutive championship than the members of the Gryffindor team. At the other end of the Great Hall, Slytherin the Quidditch team also made an appearance. I don't know what happened over there, but it was a huge commotion. Almost everyone wore a crown-shaped badge of the same color over their silver and green scarves and hats. What are those green snakes doing? Ginny suddenly sat down and asked Harley and Hermione. Judging from her angry expression, Ginny probably had given up hope of comforting Ron. Anyway, it's not anything nice. Harley shook her head after clearly seeing the badge. If I'm not mistaken, Ron's mentality is probably going to collapse in today's game. The players were finally about to head to the Quidditch arena, and cheers erupted from the students around them. Everyone walked through the foyer, onto the stone steps, and disappeared into the biting, cold winter air. The grass on Quidditch pitch was covered with a layer of frost, which made a crisp sound when you stepped on it. When the players changed into their team uniforms and walked onto the field, the area was already filled with students. The cheers were especially enthusiastic once again. After a year and a half without any matches to watch, everyone had been looking forward to this Quidditch match for a long time. Lee's familiar yet unique voice rang out. "Hi everyone, it's been a long time. Welcome back to the Quidditch tournament scene that we haven't been able to visit for so long. I'm Lee Jordan, a longtime friend of yours, and this will be my last year commentating on the Quidditch Cup. I hope I can continue to provide you with a great experience." As we can see, all 14 team members are in position, the captains have shaken hands, and the match begins. With a whistle from Madame Hooch, 15 brooms simultaneously soared into the air. Harley rolled to dodge a stray ball and caught the quaffle served by Madame Hooch. We can see that Harley got the quaffle first, and then made a one-on-one cut. What a classic start. She truly deserves to be the sharpest weapon in Gryffindor's treble-winning dynasty. Her scoring ability is beyond doubt. Monty and Puce both tried to intercept him and rushed forward one after the other, but Harley dodged them by swinging his broom. She even ducked to avoid Crabbe's lone ball. Could goalkeeper Blitch stop it? No, he couldn't. Goal. Quaffle pierced through Blitch's defenses precisely and disappeared into the circle, making the scoreboard 10-0. All of this happened so fast that most viewers didn't even have time to react. We can see that despite not having played for almost 2 years, Harley still maintains an excellent touch. Lee roared, Blake serves, Warrington has the ball, they're launching an attack. But Angelina made a beautiful steal. What a great girl, it's a pity she doesn't want to go on a date with me. A chorus of boos erupted from the audience, and Fred angrily gave Lee the middle finger. If Professor McGonagall hadn't been watching Lee closely, Fred would have been ready to invite his good buddy to try the walking ball. As the game progressed, the score quickly widened, and Harley once again demonstrated what speed and passion truly mean. Quaffle was almost always intercepted by Gryffindor's chasers before he could even cross half-court, and in the final stretch of the game, it was Harley who usually drove in one-on-one. A team always needs someone to play the sacrifice role, and with a strong scorer like Harley, the other two chasers don't mind playing a supporting role all the time. Unfortunately, Ron proved to everyone that he is a big game idiot. Quaffle only had 2 chances to cross the halfway line, but Ron put the ball in both of them. His second mistake was particularly egregious. Warrington charged straight toward the left goal, while Ron flew toward the right. This left Harley, who was trying to keep the opposing batter in check, completely bewildered. She wondered why the opponent hadn't made any deceptive moves. It was just a simple fastball. How could she not stop it? The score is now 70-20. Gryffindor serves, and Alicia has the ball. Lee suddenly paused, listened intently, and asked, "Wait, what are they singing in the audience?" Loud singing rose from the silvery green ocean occupied by the Slytherins. "That silly Weasley, he can't block a single ball," the Slytherins sing out loud. "Weasley is our king." A despicable underhanded tactic, trying to interfere with Gryffindor's players. Lee roared angrily after understanding what the other side was singing. Only trash would use such underhanded tactics, they're nothing but dirty cowards. Lee wanted to continue his swearing, but Professor McGonagall stopped him. Although Professor McGonagall was trembling with anger, the Slytherins' actions did not violate school rules, so the impartial Professor McGonagall would not stop them. Upon hearing the singing, Ron turned pale and missed another ball. Harley sighed. If Ron couldn't adjust on his own, his Quidditch career would be over. Harley had just received a pass from Angelina and was about to attack when she heard Fred shout at her from afar. "Do us a favor, we'd like to take a look at the Slytherin library." Harley gave an OK sign and instantly activated Firebolt. Firebolt was instantly propelled to its maximum speed, and Harley seemed to transform into a golden red flame in midair. Harley has the ball, but it's clear that the previous goals have given the Slytherin team a lot of confidence. We can see that Crabbe's roaming ball blocked Alicia and Angelina's support, while Goyle seemed to be playing without thinking, directly charging into the Weasley twins, forcing Fred and George to dodge in an emergency. If you ask me, a purebred gorilla like this shouldn't even be participating in the Quidditch competition. Lee's bias became increasingly obvious, but his behavior on the field was indeed very bad. Fueled by the singing from the sidelines, Crabbe and Goyle swung their baseball bats, forcefully separating themselves from several other players, then suddenly spurred their brooms and charged towards Harley. The Gryffindor players tried their best to catch up, but the Slytherin players were all equipped with Nimbus 2001s, which were much faster than the brooms of the other Gryffindor players. Harley himself had already disappeared into the enemy ranks, and the 7 Slytherin were vaguely forming an encirclement. "Take the ball directly. Charge together." The new captain, Monta, shouted, as he, Warrington, and Price charged forward together. "Steal" is just a literal term. What the Slytherins really meant was to directly knock Harley off the court. "You're a petite, delicate girl, do you think we can't knock you down?" Professor Snape's eyes suddenly turned cold, and his face became expressionless. He suddenly remembered that he hadn't played a game last year, and there was a new captain this year, so the brainless team members probably forgot the rule against using illegal means against Harley. "It seems that the special crucibles in my basement that were once used to boil medicinal dragon dung have found a cleaner." It was incredibly thrilling to watch from the sidelines, but Harley on the field didn't seem to feel anything at all. The opposing formation appears impenetrable, but it is actually full of loopholes. Remembering Fred's request to avenge their brother Ron, Harley deliberately stopped and beckoned with her finger in a provocative gesture. Seeing this, Slytherin's 3 burly chasers were instantly enraged, and their brooms moved even faster. As they drew closer, Harley suddenly smiled and patted the broom. The broom went out, and Harley plummeted straight to the ground. This maneuver was truly unpredictable, since Slytherin's players believed that even if they wanted to land vertically, they had to adjust their brooms first. The two sides were already too close, and this amount of time was not enough for Harley. But who could have imagined that Harley would do something like this? The 3 people were unable to break in time and collided directly, resulting in a tragic accident in midair. The smallest of the 3, Poos, was sent flying by the impact, and his Nimbus 2001 broke in 2, plummeting straight to the ground. The remaining 2 were in no better shape, their foreheads made intimate contact, causing them to bleed profusely. But that wasn't the end of it. Crabbe and Goyle, who had chased after the Gryffindor players, were approaching from above and swung their bats. When Harley disappeared, the two men focused all their limited mental processing power on the question of, where did the target go, ignoring their captain and teammates diagonally below them. So two more people joined the Slytherin aerial crowd. Harley gazed at the view above, and despite still falling downwards, he leisurely whistled. And directly below her is Malfoy. According to the pre-match plan, Malfoy's task was to surround and intercept them from below. However, for some reason, his mind was filled with the words his father had told him from the start of the competition. So Malfoy was a beat too slow and missed the mid-air impact. "Young Master Draco, may I borrow your broom?" Just as Harley and Malfoy were about to make contact, Malfoy suddenly heard this teasing voice. Using his body as cover, Harley lightly hooked his toes onto the handle of Malfoy's broom, and with a slight push, Harley, who was falling downwards, and Malfoy, who was rushing upwards, switched positions. Malfoy plunged straight into the ground, and Harley used the momentum to restart his broom, charging towards Slytherin's goal. Seeing 4 of his 6 teammates huddled together in midair, while the other 2 were deliberately trying to bump their faces into the grass, Blake was completely dumbfounded. As the quaffle flew past his ear, he merely stretched out his hand symbolically, feeling the airflow created by the quaffle passing through the rim. The crowd erupted in cheers from 3 directions, but the noisy singing from Slytherin's side abruptly stopped, leaving only silence. Slytherin Grand Library, Quidditch Tournament Limited Edition, you deserve to experience it. George couldn't help but whistle and wink at Lee. Lee smiled knowingly and teased loudly. That was a brilliant breakthrough. By the way, 7 defenders couldn't hold on to 1, do you guys even know how to play? 395 Hagrid's return. When none of the 7 defenses hold, there's no point in continuing the game. Although the Slytherin team members didn't need to go to the school hospital, they could continue the game simply by changing their brooms. However, it's clear that Harley's earlier antics had a significant impact on all the players on the field. The Gryffindor players seemed to be on steroids, running rampant across Slytherin's half as if they were strolling through their own backyard. The entire Slytherin team, however, seemed completely lost and disoriented, like headless flies, utterly clueless about what they should be doing. If it weren't known that those who made it into this team were all wealthy young masters from pure-blood families, people might really suspect they were involved in match fixing. The audience area occupied by Slytherin's little snakes was completely silent, and many little wizards even left early. What are they staying for? To wait for them to consistently lose the game and then get ridiculed by those stupid lions. Forget it, these little snakes are finally thinking about saving face. When Katie caught the golden snitch, the match finally ended, with the score settling at 490-30, and cheers erupted once again from both the players and the audience. Even the Slytherin team members breathed a sigh of relief, finally free from the torment and suffering. However, once they get back, they'll probably be in a tough meeting and get a severe scolding. Playing the snakeskin game. It's a 49-30 ratio, I could do it too. What's the point of having you guys? RNM, refund my money. On the night of the victory, the entire Gryffindor was in celebration, with snacks and drinks piled up in the common lounge to celebrate this victory that came a year and a half earlier. The Weasley twins even sneaked out of school and got several large bottles of fire whiskey from Hogshead Pub. Soon, the Gryffindor common room was filled with a bunch of people lying around, all of them quite drunk. Only Ron seemed to be in a bad mood. It was clear that the song had a significant impact on him. In fact, almost all the students at Gryffindor were furious after hearing that song. After all, it was practically a direct insult to Gryffindor. However, since they had won the game, Slytherin's actions seemed like impotent rage, so the little lions, magnanimously, chose not to take it to heart. Of course, the more fatal reason was that Professor McGonagall was watching nearby, so the students dared not make a move. Otherwise, Slytherin and his gang would have been beaten to a pulp long ago. However, at some point, Harley and Hermione were missing from the celebrating crowd. Hagrid returned because they saw the lights of the cabin next to the hunting grounds from the window. Hagrid returned quietly. No one, including Professor Dumbledore, knew of his return. This doesn't quite fit Hagrid's personality, considering he's Professor Dumbledore's #1 fan and follower. Even Professor Dumbledore's deadpan jokes, which were enough to freeze someone to death, were funny to Hagrid so that the principal wouldn't be too embarrassed. He couldn't possibly not report such an important event as returning from a mission to the principal. But Hagrid is indeed hiding Dumbledore's whereabouts now, since he has no other choice. Hagrid has a weak child who can't be seen in the light of day, namely his younger brother, a pure-blooded giant. Hagrid was in his hut at that moment, with tea boiling on the stove. Meanwhile, he was preoccupied with preparing the dragon meat for his face mask, while also pondering how to deal with his foolish and pitiful younger brother. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door of the cabin. Hagrid was startled, and Fang immediately started barking wildly. "Hagrid, it's us." When Hagrid heard the familiar voice coming from outside the window, he breathed a sigh of relief and quickly pulled out the door bolt. The wooden door slowly opened, making a creaking sound. "I should have known," Hagrid whispered to the air. "I've only been back for less than a minute and you're already here, come in quickly." Upon hearing footsteps, Hagrid immediately and carefully closed the door, locked it, and drew all the curtains. Beside the table, the disillusionment charm was deactivated, and two figures slowly emerged. Hagrid. After dispelling her illusion, Hermione was about to speak when she immediately covered her mouth in horror. Just then, she took in Hagrid's current situation by the light. Hagrid's hair was a mess, as if it hadn't been styled in months, and there were congealed blood clots on it. His left eye was swollen into a slit, and it was blue and purple, making people wonder if he could still see clearly. His exposed skin, including his cheeks, was covered in wounds, some of which were still dripping blood onto the floor. Hagrid walked very carefully, his left arm hanging down unnaturally, while his whole body leaned to the right. It's easy to tell from his strange posture that he has fractures in at least two places. Judging from the room's layout, Hagrid had indeed just arrived home. The cabin floor had been swept clean, but the windows and cabinets were covered in dust, and there were no blankets on the bed. A thick black travel cloak was draped over the back of the chair, the snow on it not completely melted, and there were faint traces of blood. Another backpack, as tall as an adult wizard, was leaning against the wall, with congealed blood clots on it. Upon seeing the two, Hagrid grinned sheepishly and headed toward the stove to get the tea that had already been brewed. But Harley stopped him. "Hagrid, don't move." "What?" Hagrid's ears must have been injured too, and he looked at Harley in confusion. "I meant you should stand still to avoid aggravating your injury. Now I'll treat you first." As he spoke, Harley pulled out a wand and took out two clear glass bottles from his pocket, containing light gray and dark purple potions. She waved the wand gently, and the two bottles instantly flew into the air before exploding. The glass shards were wiped away by the vanishing charm, while the potion's liquid remained suspended in midair. Aguamenti. A stream of water cascaded down from midair, thoughtfully heated to a warm temperature. The bloodstains around Hagrid's wound were quickly cleaned away, followed by a deep purple liquid that covered the wound. The light gray liquid went directly into his mouth and quickly spread throughout Hagrid's body. With a crisp sound, Hagrid's broken bone quickly healed. "Sweep it clean. Dry it quickly." Hermione realized she should do something and waved the wand in response. Hagrid's mole fur coat, which was already soaked through by the water, quickly heated up, and the water evaporated instantly. Within 5 minutes, Hagrid had returned to the familiar look that Harley and Hermione knew. He waved his arm, spun around, and exclaimed in surprise. "That's great. I didn't expect these injuries to heal so quickly. I thought it would take half a month to fully recover." Only then did Hermione have the time to ask a series of questions. "Hagrid, why haven't you been to school lately? Did you go to the Alps to look for giant? And what about your injuries? Were they inflicted by those giants?" "No, most of the wounds seem to have appeared recently, the timing doesn't match up, could it be from some other creature?" "No, I didn't, don't talk nonsense." Upon hearing the words, Alps, and giant, Hagrid's face instantly contorted with panic, and he sat bolt upright. "My injuries are just from when I accidentally fell, that's all." Seeing Hermione's suspicious gaze, Hagrid's face grew increasingly panicked, and he began his clumsy performance. "Ah, my injuries are healed, I feel much better. I think I should leave the cabin and take a stroll in the Forbidden Forest to stretch my muscles." "Hagrid, don't forget who treated your injuries," Harley suddenly reminded him. "If I can heal your wounds, do you think I wouldn't be able to tell where these injuries came from? These wounds are clearly the kind of wounds only giant could inflict, and there's that unique scent on you that hasn't faded yet. Should you confess yourself, or should I say it for you?" Hearing the slightly upturned tone at the end and seeing that wicked grin, Hagrid's expression grew increasingly terrified. All right, I give up. Damn, you guys are really knowledgeable." Seeing that things had been said to this extent, Hagrid had no choice but to surrender. "Although it's classified information, I should be able to reveal a little bit, since you've all guessed it. During the time I disappeared, I was following Professor Dumbledore's orders to go to the Alps to find giant." Hermione gasped in surprise, while Harley looked on with a hint of curiosity. Although she also took advantage of the summer vacation to visit the Alps and had a pleasant conversation with a giant, reaching a consensus. Unfortunately, Gao Gao Ma's intelligence was limited. Aside from conveying information like his location, he couldn't transmit much other useful information. Meanwhile, his clone also had a mission to complete, constantly collecting materials, when he happened to stumble upon the scene of Hagrid and Madame Maxime escaping in the Alps. So she was eager to hear Hagrid's description of this amazing journey. Let me think about where to begin. Hagrid scratched his head, frowning as he pondered. After the summer vacation started, I first went to the school in Olymp under the pretext of going to Beauxbatons for an exchange program. After all, the relationship between Professor Dumbledore and the Ministry of Magic was quite strained at the time, and I was afraid that someone was spying on me, so I had no choice but to use this method. After that, Olymp took me to the Alps and was very happy to accept Professor Dumbledore's request to assist me. We are quite certain that Giant is in that mountain range. After all, the French Ministry of Magic has always kept records of it. After we arrived in Alps, we had to stop using magic, since Giant didn't like Wizard, and we didn't want to provoke them. In addition, Dumbledore had warned us that Lord Voldemort would definitely send Death Eater to contact Giant, so we cannot expose ourselves in advance. And then, Hermione followed up with a timely question. Hagrid took a big gulp of tea and shook his head vigorously. We found Giant very easily below the ridge. After all, the book says that their average height is 20 feet, and the tallest is even 25 feet. Such a large size makes them very easy to identify. It's a pity that there are not many giants left, only about 80. When they left Britain, there were more than 800. We were supposed to contact their leader as Professor Dumbledore instructed, but we arrived at the wrong time. Hearing this, Harley blinked. She roughly determined when Hagrid and Madame Maxime would arrive. When we arrived, the giants were just breaking out in internal strife, a brutal and bloody rebellion, Hagrid said, sounding shaken. It turns out that the leader of the giants is Kakus, a giant who is 23 feet tall, with 2 heavy heads and skin like a rhinoceros. He was the biggest, the ugliest, and the laziest, sitting there waiting for the other giants to offer him dead sheep and deer to eat. We had brought gifts, but just as we were about to come out of the cave, another giant suddenly appeared out of nowhere. That giant horse was a full 26 feet tall, even taller than the tallest giant recorded in the book. He easily overturned the ordinary giants around him, and with just 2 blows, he smashed Kakus's arms, then chopped off Kakus's head with a machete made from bone, becoming the new giant, Gugo. Our original plan was forced to be terminated, and we could only wait until the next day to visit Gao Gao Ma with gifts. Unfortunately, Gao Gao Ma wasn't interested in us and, in front of us, accepted Death Eater's offer of help, then turned around and started hunting us down. The next part of the journey is that we abandon the mission given by Professor Dumbledore and run away. Hagrid took another big gulp of tea, then sighed with considerable regret. We all thought we couldn't escape. After all, many giants were chasing us, and Death Eater even helped them. Fortunately, an internal conflict suddenly broke out among the giants. Gao Gao Ma went berserk and beat 2 giants to death with his club, which allowed us to escape. Then we went straight back to China, avoiding the sight of others and the pursuit of the Ministry of Magic along the way, and finally parted ways in France. Harley nodded, and that put everything in sync. His own clone only interfered with Gogoma after seeing Hagrid and Madame Maxime being chased, causing Gogoma to go berserk. While Harley was still pondering, Hermione keenly noticed something. Hagrid, there's something wrong with what you're saying. According to you, your last contact with Giant was about a month ago. But looking at the wounds on your body caused by Giant, these don't seem like injuries from a month ago. Hagrid was stunned for a moment before coughing awkwardly twice. Would you believe me if I said those fresh wounds were really from a fall? Hermione gave him a look, letting him figure it out himself. Hagrid scratched his head. So, actually, Madame Maxime was drunk and accidentally hit him. Then do you believe I'm Merlin? Hermione retorted. It would be more convincing if you said you were just bored and beating yourself. Hagrid immediately looked distressed and remained silent for a long time before cautiously saying, well, actually, this is a long story. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 396 Warning. Warning. Who are you calling short? Quote. So that's how I came back with Grop. Faced with Harley and Hermione's relentless questioning, Hagrid finally confessed the truth. According to him, his mother, the most brutal female giant in history, Frejufa, returned to the giant tribe soon after leaving her father. There, she found a new love and gave birth to Grop, Hagrid's half-brother. However, Grop's life in the giant clan was not good. After all, he was too short. As the shortest giant in the entire giant tribe, he was basically someone any adult giant could bully at will. Since the giants don't have any laws, when fights break out, other giants just stand around waving sticks and cheering them on. Frejufa, the mother, also refused to acknowledge her useless son, feeling ashamed to have given birth to such a child. So after discovering her poor little brother, Hagrid decided to bring Grop back with her. I understand your reasoning. After hearing Hagrid's explanation, Hermione appeared frighteningly calm. But Harley, who had spent so much time with Hermione, could tell that this was definitely a prelude to a lion's roar. If it weren't for Hagrid in front of her, Hermione would have already shown him what it meant to be, little McGonagall. But I have another question. How did you manage to quietly bring that 16-foot-tall giant back to Hogwarts? We traveled through the night, through desolate wilderness, and were finally lucky enough to find an abandoned ship and cross the English Channel. Hagrid twisted his hands in pain. Of course, Olympe helped us a little too. She performed several very useful magic tricks for Grop and me, and kept us in France. Then we parted ways. Olympe seemed unhappy. She probably didn't like Grop and was a bit annoyed with him. Harley shook her head, feeling that Hagrid's wording was still too conservative. What does somewhat mean? This somewhat definitely deserves some consideration. Madame Maxime spent her entire life trying to hide her mixed-race giant identity and didn't want any contact with giant, so as not to affect her future. The fact that Madame Maxime was willing to accompany you to find the giant shows just how good she was to Hagrid. And what about you, Hagrid? You openly brought along a 16-foot-tall, brutal giant, claiming him as your brother, and even wanted to bring him near a magic school like Hogwarts, practically wanting everyone to know your lineage. Harley felt that no matter how good-natured Madame Maxime was, and how much she liked Hagrid, their relationship would be over when Hagrid decided to take Grop back. Hagrid, you're destined to be single forever. I never imagined you were the real Lord Voldemort. Harley turned to look at Hermione and found that Hermione was also looking at her, their eyes holding the same inexplicable meaning. Hagrid, no matter what you think, you cannot bring giant to Hogwarts. Hermione spoke again, this time in a very stern tone. I know I shouldn't have brought him. Professor Dumbledore wouldn't allow it. Hagrid's face was full of pain. And Grop didn't want to come either. On the way here, he kept resisting and wanted to go back. Then why don't you let him go? I can't do it. Hagrid's voice sounded inexplicably desperate as he wrung his hands together. I have to bring him back, Hermione, I have to do it. If Grop is left with the giants in the Alps, this poor child will continue to be bullied by the giants. Even though he's a giant, he's still a child. Hermione glanced at Hagrid's face. Although it looked normal now, it was covered in tears, which streamed down his beard. But Hermione could never forget Hagrid's bruised and battered face, his body covered in injuries and his broken arm. He beat you up like that, and you still call him a child. Hermione wanted to say something more, but Harley stopped her. Hagrid, regarding Grop's future, I think you should discuss it in detail with Professor Dumbledore. The professor will give you a reasonable answer. Harley's voice was very serious and carried an unquestionable tone, and now, we have more important things to deal with. Although it's getting late, I think we should go to the Forbidden Forest and cast some magic around Grop before things get even more chaotic. No, Hagrid exclaimed, startled. No, I absolutely won't allow it. That's too dangerous. Forbidden Forest is dangerous at night, with all sorts of magical creatures, and I haven't taught Grop manners and English yet. So he hasn't completely curbed his ferocity yet, it would be dangerous for you to go. So now you know there's danger. Harley gave Hagrid a very obvious eye roll. Then why don't you consider how dangerous it is for the students to have Grop staying in Forbidden Forest, right next to Hogwarts School? Even if you wanted to teach him manners and English so he would be less dangerous, do you think the creatures of Forbidden Forest would let him stay there until he learned it? Seeing that Hagrid was still hesitating, Harley decided to give him another dose of shocking information. Don't forget, the Forbidden Forest is home to Unicorn and Centaur, and they have a very good relationship with Professor Dumbledore. If they complain to Professor Dumbledore, how disappointed will Professor Dumbledore be in you? Furthermore, the Ministry of Magic has Centaur's office. If Centaur were to file a complaint, the Ministry of Magic would have another reason to target Professor Dumbledore. Hagrid, you wouldn't want Professor Dumbledore to get into even more trouble because of you, would you? Considering that Hagrid had been isolated in the deep mountains for so long and knew nothing about the situation, Harley resorted to a combination of coaxing and deception. Hagrid actually fell for it, since his biggest fear in life was disappointing Professor Dumbledore or causing him trouble. And the Forbidden Forest is not dangerous for Harley at all. You probably don't know that Harley won the International Wizarding Duel competition this summer. Seeing that Hagrid was completely swayed, Hermione immediately pressed her advantage, giving him some encouragement. As for Grop, Harley can take on Dragon one-on-one, so Giant can't possibly threaten her. Okay, you're right. Hermione's words gave Hagrid a boost of confidence, leading him to make his final decision. Let's go, take wand with you, I'll take you to meet my brother. The Forbidden Forest is quiet and peaceful at night, with only the cold wind blowing through the treetops and the occasional howl of a wolf heard in the distance. Hagrid held a crossbow in one hand and a lantern in the other, appearing very cautious. Hermione said that she would be very safe with Harley around, but she actually cautiously pulled out the wand. Harley, however, was completely unprepared, wandering through Forbidden Forest with his hands in his pockets, as if he were on a picnic. After all, the level of the creatures in the Forbidden Forest was far too low and too weak for Harley. Even if she lies there motionless and no creature can kill her, why be so cautious? The three quickly traversed the woods, passing through the territories of Acromantula and Centaur, and finally arrived near a clearing. Tall trees grew around the open space, with ropes tied to the trees, the other end of which was connected to a mound on the open space. Hagrid. Hermione's voice trembled slightly, but she calmed down considerably after Harley took her hand. Look, this is my brother, Grop, Hagrid said, pointing to the mound of earth. I plan to build fences and barriers around here, along with ropes. I believe that will be enough to restrain him. Grop doesn't know how strong he is yet, but he will definitely improve after I teach him for a while longer. Grop woke up from his sleep, probably because he heard the voices around him, and slowly sat up. Grop rubbed his eyes and turned to look at the source of the voice. Hag. His deformed face looked incredibly angry in the dim light, full of morning grumpiness, but unfortunately Hagrid didn't seem to notice. Look at what a bright child. Hearing her name called, Hagrid's eyes welled up with tears again, but this time it was out of joy. He has completely memorized my name and even learned how to pronounce it, well, maybe a little off, but it doesn't matter. I knew he was a good kid, a harmless good kid, and everyone would like him. Before Hagrid could finish speaking, he suddenly noticed Hermione in front of him with her mouth wide open, letting out a scream. Hagrid, watch out behind you. Hagrid quickly turned around and saw that Grop had somehow gotten up, carrying a large tree in his hand, and shouting simple words. Bad. Grop, now, home. The tree crashed down hard, and Hagrid quickly took a half step back, trying to shield Hermione and Harley behind him, while covering his head with his hands. Based on his long experience with Grop, he figured that with his thick skin, the fall of the tree trunk would at most break his bones, and Grop would stay quiet for a long time afterward. However, Hagrid didn't see the tree trunk she expected. Instead, she felt her coat collar being grabbed, and she was suddenly thrown backward before landing steadily under a large tree. Hermione was also thrown next to him, landing steadily, her eyes full of question marks, not knowing why she was here. Before the two could even think, they heard a loud bang. Looking in the direction of the sound, the two saw that the large tree in Grop's hand had been cut in half. Harley remained standing there, holding an empty potion bottle in her hand, one leg dangling in midair. Hagrid, the giants don't believe in your logic, they believe in the might of the fist. Harley's voice carried on the cold wind. Would you mind if I spar with Grop? I happen to have recently developed a new potion that can temporarily enhance physical strength and power. Before Hagrid could answer, Harley looked at Grop, who had already retracted the tree trunk, and said loudly in Giant, a language Grop could understand. Come on, little guy, let's fight one-on-one. The giants of Wizarding World are not as intelligent as the giants of the future Second Era. Their language consists of simple words and lacks certain essential word components, making it difficult to form sentences. However, in the current situation, Harley has already used it to provoke others. The surroundings seemed to fall silent suddenly, and a strange warning sound drifted through the air. Warning. Warning. Who did you say, Shorty? Grop roared angrily and uprooted a tree thicker than the previous one, hurling it at Harley. This made Hagrid's heart tremble. This was much more powerful than the previous blow, even he himself would probably have been sent flying. Hermione screamed in terror, but Harley even had the leisure to straighten his sleeves, and then gently lifted them with his right hand. With a loud bang, the tree trunk stopped a short distance from the ground, held up by Harley with one hand, unable to move forward an inch. Assassins are indeed not good at strength, but any Sequence 2 angel can overpower a Sequence 5 guardian of the warrior path in terms of strength. This has nothing to do with pathways or sequences, it's simply a suppression based on life level and status. Why don't you ever learn? Harley shook her head. It was already proven before that this trick doesn't work on me. Never mind, I wasn't expecting you to come up with anything particularly good anyway. Now, it's my turn. Harley vanished into thin air in an instant, reappearing at Grop's chest. With a gentle press, Grop was sent flying, crashing heavily into a small hill behind him. Disobedient children need to be disciplined properly. Harley hummed a lullaby softly, disappearing into the air. A moment later, Hagrid stared in disbelief at the scene before him. The CPU had been completely burned out. Grop now sits obediently on the ground, listening to Harley's lecture. He clearly didn't like being locked up by Hagrid, and he didn't like being here. But now Harley has made a series of demands of him, including, stay here and don't go anywhere, which Grop has accepted in their entirety. Is this still the same bloodthirsty, cruel, and violent giant tribe? Hagrid thinks Grop is even more obedient than Fang. Hagrid, I've talked to him for you. After speaking with Grop, Harley turned to Hagrid. He promised to stay obediently around this open space and not stray too far, and he also asked me to use magic. How did you manage to make him so obedient? Hagrid scratched his head and asked curiously. Harley couldn't help but roll her eyes. Please, Hagrid, what you're facing is giant, the epitome of cold-bloodedness and inability to communicate. You know yourself that more than 800 giants were expelled from Britain and went to the Alps. The resources there are more than enough to support them, and even more than enough to support an equal number of giants. But what's the truth? The truth is that this group of giants started a civil war on their own without the wizard's intervention, and ended up with only 80-odd giants left, all because they were bored. If humans also had this characteristic, Thanos wouldn't have needed to collect the Infinity Stones. Hermione also added her own comment at the opportune moment. Thanos. What's that? Hagrid's focus was different. And the Infinity Stones, do you mean Philosopher's Stone? Hermione suddenly remembered that this was Wizarding World, and Hagrid definitely hadn't read Marvel Comics, so she quickly changed the subject. In short, Hagrid, do you really think playing the family card will work when dealing with a race like this? Hagrid's attention was drawn back. After thinking for a while, he reluctantly nodded. You're right, Grop is indeed very dangerous. I'll report to Professor Dumbledore tomorrow. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 397. Oh, Hermione, are you blushing? Let me see. Harley didn't pay much attention to the aftermath of Grop's actions, she had done all she could. To be honest, Harley was already used to Hagrid's thoughtless behavior. She just hoped Hagrid wouldn't have a brain fart and then ask his students to study giant after teaching Grop English. Hagrid's return also caused quite a stir at Hogwarts, with students experiencing both joy and sorrow. On the one hand, it's because Christmas is coming soon, and everyone is glad that Hagrid is back in time when they think about the decorations for this year's Halloween. On the other hand, it's because of the current substitute professor. Professor Grubbly Plank is leaving, and Hagrid will be taking over the magical creatures class. Hagrid's Protect the Magical Creatures class, well, those who know, it's never actually online. And Hagrid lived up to expectations in his first class after returning. Professor Grubbly Plank had already left a syllabus, telling him about the animals that frequently appeared in the owl's exam. Given the scope of magical creatures in this syllabus, Hagrid had only taught Niffler and Unicorn in the previous 2 years, and hadn't mentioned more than half of them. So during his substitute teaching period, Professor Grubbly Plank sped up his pace and tackled nearly half of the required course material. The other person was just a temporary worker, yet they've already gone to such lengths, it's incredibly kind of them. Hagrid, on the other hand, just needs to follow the established procedures. However, he felt that this kind of course was too boring and needed to be, slightly, modified, and he successfully gave the students a big surprise. On his first day back at school, Hagrid brought along the Thestral team that was responsible for pulling the wagons for the school. To be honest, even Harley, using all his Sequence 2 thinking abilities, couldn't understand why Hagrid would show a living Thestral to a group of students who didn't understand death and therefore couldn't see the Thestral. Giving a live demonstration to a group of students who can't see the Thestral, would it be effective? Would it be meaningful? Perhaps only Hagrid could pull that off. Fortunately, Umbridge applied for indefinite leave due to both physical and mental distress. Harley strongly suspects that if Hagrid were to run into Umbridge, he would receive a notice to remain on probation within 10 days. November has flown by, December is just around the corner, and Christmas is finally almost here. Snowflakes began to swirl and dance outside the window again, constantly pounding against the icy windowsill. Hagrid may not be good at teaching, but he never disappoints when it comes to supplying holiday decorations. He selected 12 tall pine trees from the Forbidden Forest as Christmas trees and placed them in various corners of the Great Hall. Professor Flevy thoughtfully conjured large, non-melting snowflakes, sparkling icicles, and various ribbons as decorations. The castle's stairs and railings were now covered with colorful holly and tinfoil, with small bells attached that made a clear, ringing sound when touched. Ever-burning candles flickered inside the helmets of the armored figures in the corridor, and a large bunch of mistletoe hung above each suit of armor. Everyone was excited and looking forward to the upcoming Christmas. In addition to the usual Christmas dinner, there is another exciting event this year, Slughorn. The professor is preparing to host a Christmas party. 2 weeks before Christmas, Slughorn the professor then spread rumors at the school. He plans to host a Christmas party in his office, and will only invite outstanding students. According to Slughorn, the professor said that many successful people from outside the school would be attending the party, which undoubtedly made the little wizards even more eager for the party. Unfortunately, the vast majority of students did not receive an invitation, so they could only hope that those who did receive an invitation would be willing to take them along. Slughorn the professor allows each invited little wizard to bring one companion. Harley and Hermione both received invitations from the professor, but they decided to go together instead, thus avoiding further consideration of the invitations. This made the other students feel sorry for them. Harley's invitation to Hermione to the Christmas ball at Triwizard Tournament last year could be attributed to the fact that he didn't have anyone else he liked. This year it happened again, and anyone who isn't blind can see the difference. Is this really just following the realities of Great Britain, a case of the cabbage robbing the cabbage? How can resources be wasting each other? It's heartbreaking. Others may feel heartbroken, but Harley will definitely ignore it. She can't possibly compromise her sexual orientation for someone else's sake, can she? On a small scale, this is self-torture and making yourself unhappy. On a larger scale, what if you mess up the performance and lose control? Therefore, Harley's actions were truly righteous, as he was trying to prevent his own Tao heart from breaking down and his extraordinary characteristics from going out of control and causing harm to all living beings. The Christmas party will be held at 7 p.m. In Gryffindor's dorm room, Hermione was helping Harley fix her waist-length hair. Harley could have easily used her extraordinary abilities to neatly style her long hair. However, she deliberately concealed this fact, contentedly enjoying the comfortable feeling of Hermione gently brushing the ends of her hair as she combed it. "Isn't your outfit a little too formal?" Hermione asked, glancing at Harley's clothes as she applied hair care products. Harley wore a moon-white silk blouse tonight, with a high-waisted white tulle skirt studded with countless colored diamonds, resembling a sky full of stars. She also wore a lot of accessories, which was unusual for her. She had a light gold necklace around her neck with a bright silver gemstone at the end. The gemstone gave off a hazy feeling, as if a silver veil, or invisible flowing water, was contained within its solid outer shell. Harley was now wearing white silk gloves, and a black gemstone ring was securely placed on the middle finger of her left hand. Whenever Hermione saw the ring, her face would involuntarily turn red, as if Harley was hinting at something to her. "Really? It's all right." Harley didn't notice Hermione's expression. Instead, she admired her own appearance in the mirror. "I think this outfit is quite suitable for tonight. After all, there is a very important party tonight." "Slughorn, is the professor's Christmas party that important to you?" Hermione carefully braided her hair into a princess braid, her tone slightly surprised. "Slughorn the professor has hosted a lot of club dinners this semester. But I remember you never went, and you always used the excuse of doing magic research with me." Harley smiled, but instead of answering directly, she changed the subject. "Aren't you dressed similarly to me? The clothes I picked out myself look nice, don't they?" Hermione wore a navy blue off-the-shoulder V-neck dress tonight. The dress had few embellishments, with only a belt around the waist, and the lace trim at the bottom of the dress was adorned with twinkling stars. Harley had carefully tidied up her messy hair and secured it with a bright silver hair clip, so that it now lay smoothly and flat against Hermione's back. "I dressed up like this to match you, didn't I?" Hermione recalled the earlier dressing scene, and her face turned even redder. "And besides, it was you who insisted that I wear this long dress." Harley couldn't help but laugh. Hermione was initially reluctant to get dressed, feeling that it was too much of a waste of time. "It's just an ordinary Christmas party, why make such a fuss?" However, she was just being Tsunere. When Harley actually approached Hermione with the clothes in hand and a lewd smile, Hermione didn't even offer a token resistance. She simply stood up and obediently stretched out her body, letting Harley do as she pleased. "All right, all done." Hermione took 2 steps back, admiring her work with satisfaction. "My beloved consort, help me up." Harley lazily raised one hand. Hermione remained unmoved, only giving Harley a disdainful look. "Stand up by yourself. I don't believe that if I don't help you up, you'll never get up. You actually didn't even object to being called, beloved concubine, tisk tisk tisk. Harley tidied up the various cosmetics on the table in front of her, then pulled the chair back with 2 threads, creating an armrest out of thin air. Hermione, who had calmed down, suddenly blushed again. Without a second thought, she lunged forward with a scream. "Ah, you wretched witch, I'll fight you to the death." Unfortunately, her pounce had no deterrent effect, it only made Harley feel like a kitten was cuddling with her. Harley simply smiled and opened her arms, while gently pushing the chair Hermione had been sitting on when she had combed her hair with her left foot. Hermione wasn't paying attention to her footing and tripped over the chair. When she came to her senses, Harley had already picked her up in a princess carry. "Does my beloved concubine really want me to hold you like this?" Harley couldn't help but tease. "Actually, I wouldn't mind going to the Christmas party like this." "Wait, are you blushing? Let me see." Before she could finish speaking, Hermione abruptly cut her off. After a while, Hermione finally released Harley, panting, and said, "Put me down right now. We'll be late if we don't leave soon." Although it was already the holidays, almost no students were willing to leave. After all, the Christmas ball a year ago left a very deep impression on everyone, making it unforgettable. Many students are in Slughorn. I wandered around the professor's office, hoping to bump into someone who had received Slughorn. The professor's invitation, without little wizards, companions, gave him the opportunity to sneak in. When Harley and Hermione appeared at the top of the stairs, a gasp of surprise rippled through the crowd. Many little witches felt a pang of heartache. Where are we inferior to Hermione? Sister, come see me. Give me a gig. Ignoring the surrounding noise, the two quickly moved forward along the path that the crowd had spontaneously parted, entering Slughorn. In the professor's office. This office has been equipped with the undetectable extension charm, making it much larger than a typical office and exceptionally spacious. The room's ceiling and walls were draped with bright red, emerald green, sky blue, and earthy yellow curtains, resembling a large tent. The curtains were also painted with the representative animals of each college, giving all attendees a sense of belonging. Golden lanterns hung from the ceiling, illuminating the entire room. Tiny sprites, no bigger than fingernails, twinkled within the lanterns, each a bright point of light. Melodious singing drifted from every corner of the room, as if someone was using a mandala bell to accompany a party, but no one could be seen following the sound. Several wizards, engrossed in conversation, held pipes, puffing out clouds of smoke as they chatted, their heads enveloped in wisps of blue smoke. House elf members moved nimbly through the crowd, dragging heavy silver trays laden with various drinks, resembling mobile dining tables. It was freezing cold outside, but there were so many wizards in the room that it felt crowded and stuffy. "Oh, Harley, my dear child." Slughorn had barely stepped inside when Harley, the professor, then shouted in a booming voice. "And Hermione, welcome. Come in quickly, there are so many people you want to meet." Slughorn the professor wore a white smoking shirt and an elegant velvet hat adorned with various decorations. Several middle-aged men were surrounding him, and Harley spotted some familiar faces. "Good evening, Professor." Harley first addressed Slughorn. The professor greeted everyone, then went on to greet the middle-aged wizards around him. "Mr. Damocles, it's been a long time. Ems Jones, I've missed you dearly since we last met." Harley greeted the wizards with practiced ease, and the adult wizards from outside the school responded with smiles. When Slughorn occasionally encounters strangers, the professor will proactively introduce the two parties and subtly point out each other's identities. Although Harley was very young, at least a generation younger than the wizards in front of her, everyone was very friendly. Many of them had been corresponding with Harley for 2 or 3 years, discussing magic for so long, they were already old acquaintances. And for those who don't know Harley yet, who would refuse such a promising and talented young girl? "Oh, right, Harley." Slughorn the professor suddenly remembered something. "I had also invited the elder Toulouse, but he's been too busy lately to come from France." Toulouse is the name of Fleur's father, Mr. Delacour. "That's a real shame." Harley's expression shifted slightly in response. "I really wanted to discuss the improvements to Polyjuice Potion with Mr. Delacour offline again last time." "That's truly a pity." Slughorn the professor chuckled softly. "But someone has come in place of old Toulouse." Before Harley could even process the meaning of those words, she suddenly felt a heavy weight on her back. "Harley." A warm sensation caressed Harley's ear. "Did you miss me?" Harley's smile froze for a moment. 398 An ally who is not human. To be honest, after a whole year of trials and tribulations, this wasn't the first time Harley had been ambushed by Fleur while with Hermione, so she shouldn't have been nervous. But tonight is different. Harley had just helped Hermione change into a new dress for the party, and then Hermione kissed her and covered her mouth. So even though the witch was a seasoned veteran, her heart still raced abnormally for a moment before she forced herself to calm down. Long time no see. Harley gave Fleur a natural hug, a flawless smile on her face. Fleur wore a pale purple dress tonight, which perfectly complemented her beautiful long silver hair. We've been apart for so long, and you've only written me 5 letters. Fleur deliberately puffed out his cheeks and immediately rubbed Harley's face hard, sounding angry. Hermione instinctively grabbed Harley's arm and pulled her into her arms, while giving Fleur a sharp glare. After all, some things must be prioritized. That's called sovereignty. Harley sighed helplessly. She only had this one clone left for tonight's Hogwarts, and she didn't know what to do about the upcoming dance segment. Fortunately, Harley's experience in dealing with chaotic situations was still incredibly rich, and she managed to find a way out of a seemingly hopeless situation. After chatting with her best friend for a while, Harley deliberately moved closer to a group of potions masters and began discussing the issue of potion innovation. Slughorn the professor, still slightly drunk, waved his hand dismissively, thinking that the night before Christmas should be spent enjoying oneself and not discussing academic matters. However, upon hearing Harley's first suggestion, he promptly excused himself for 2 minutes. Upon returning, Slughorn the professor, while sipping his freshly prepared hangover potion, excitedly joined the discussion. You can enjoy yourself anytime, and you can drink alcohol anytime. But this kind of high-level potions game, if you miss it this time, you really don't know when the next one will be. The most advanced potion is not just about preparing ingredients and cooking them, it also involves the use of various spells, transfiguration, and other magical knowledge. Soon enough, more and more magic masters joined the discussion. Everyone here is a leader in their respective fields, incredibly passionate about their research, and it's a rare opportunity to have such a large-scale offline gathering. So eating, drinking, and dancing can naturally be postponed a bit, but the discussion about magic can't wait at all. After the academic research had been underway for some time, Slughorn the professor suddenly remembered that there was a dance tonight. The guests can certainly immerse themselves fully in the academic discussion, but as the host of the party, I must consider the needs of other guests who cannot participate in the academic discussion. So the Christmas ball finally began, and with this buffer period, Hermione and Fleur finally managed to discuss the order of events, so that Harley wouldn't suffer the fate of being hacked, beheaded, and thrown into a small boat like Makoto Shinkai. Halfway through the ball, Harley suddenly felt a message coming from one of her clones. Is it finally here? The real feast is about to begin tonight. Harley's lips curled up slightly. 5 minutes later, a burst of fire suddenly appeared above Harley's head, startling many people. Phoenix, a golden-red bird, landed on Harley's shoulder and even took 2 sips of the mead in her glass without any hesitation. Fox, what brings you here? Harley asked again, even though she already knew why he was there. Fox let out 2 short, sharp whistles. Harley nodded. Professor Dumbledore wants to see me. I'm coming right now. Then she looked at Slughorn Professor. I'm very sorry, Professor, I must excuse myself. Professor Dumbledore seems to have something urgent, so he sent Fox to find me. It's all right, go find Albus. Slughorn the professor smiled and nodded in understanding. Harley bowed slightly to apologize to the acquaintances present, comforted Hermione and Fleur, and then turned into flames with Fox, disappearing into the air. In the headmaster's office, Harley appeared out of thin air and landed safely on the ground. However, the office was empty except for portraits of the old principals who were discussing something wildly. Upon Harley's arrival, the old principals tacitly fell silent, keeping the room quiet. The usually talkative Phineas remained silent, while the other, rarely uttering principal, Evra, spoke rapidly as he briefed Harley on the situation. Harley, it's urgent, so I'll keep it short. Tonight, Professor Dumbledore suddenly received an urgent request for help from the Ministry of Magic, saying that a group of people had broken into the Ministry of Magic, taken Minister Fudge hostage, and had once again invaded the Department of Mysteries. Professor Dumbledore has already arrived, but those people's magic skills are truly remarkable. Professor Dumbledore is currently fighting them and will not be able to defeat them in a short time. Now, an urgent report has come from Azkaban that Death Eater has launched a large-scale invasion of Azkaban in an attempt to rescue the imprisoned core members of Death Eater. Professor Dumbledore says he can't be in 2 places at once, so he hopes you can go to Azkaban to stop them. Fox can be lent to you as a means of transportation and temporary life support. I understand, I'll head to Azkaban right now. Despite hearing such big news, Harley remained unusually calm. However, Fawkes can just drop me off near Azkaban. He can then assist Professor Dumbledore and be more effective. It's up to you. I'm just a messenger. Aphra shrugged. By the way, you actually have the strength to face Lord Voldemort head-on now. I thought Albus was joking with us. When Professor Dumbledore told me this in the Ministry of Magic, the group of Aurors around me were absolutely stunned. It's passable. Harley's neatly tied hair came loose, and a mechanical pocket watch fell out from it. She glanced at the mechanical watch, then nodded. Time is of the essence, so I won't chat with you any longer. I'll have to excuse myself for now. With that, she grabbed Fawkes's foot, and the two of them disappeared from the room. On the shore of Beihai Park, the night was pitch black, and torrential rain poured down from the sky. Fawkes had already been sent back by Harley to assist Professor Dumbledore, leaving Harley alone. Although she kept saying that time was of the essence, Harley stood on the shore with her arms outstretched, welcoming the sea breeze, showing no sign of taking any action. The white dress fluttered in the wind, its surface shimmering with a milky white light that protected it from the rain. Sister Harley, aren't you leaving yet? Hedwig descended from the sky and landed on Harley's shoulder. Looks like preparations are almost complete. Harley glanced at the sea. It's time to set off. At this time, the moon and stars were completely obscured by dark clouds, making the sea appear extremely dark. Hedwig, you should go back to Hogwarts first, Harley said softly, suddenly remembering something. The battle that is about to take place is not something you can get involved in. Hedwig tilted its head, didn't ask why, and obediently flapped its wings before soaring into the sky and disappearing into the clouds. Harley slowly walked into the sea only when there was no sound of other living things around her, and only the crisp sound of rain hitting the ground. The seawater quickly submerged Harley's feet, white stockings, the hem of her long skirt, and finally reached above her head. However, no one could be seen underwater, as if the water had swallowed Harley up out of thin air. Only a clump of black, broken hair suddenly appeared on the water's surface, as if leaving a mark in place. At the same time, in a circular area of sea surrounding Azkaban Island, countless severed hairs also rose from the seabed, with eerie emerald light occasionally flashing across their jet-black surfaces. On Azkaban Island, black triangular buildings stand silently in the torrential rain, and chains that extend from the spires into the surrounding sea shake and rattle in the gale. The gale whipped up waves that crashed against the rocks on the island, creating a deafening roar. The protective magic that Azkaban originally possessed would have shielded them from these severe weather conditions, but now, all the protective magic has been brutally torn to shreds by the spell. The gale whipped up another giant wave, which crashed violently against the main gate of Azkaban. As the tide receded, a witch in a white dress was left behind. The witch wore a pale gold necklace, but the silver gem located in the hollow where her two collarbones met had shattered at some point. The bright silver substance inside, resembling flowing water, instantly unfolded and transformed into an invisibility cloak. Hidden. Harley uttered a word from the Second Age giant language, and the invisibility cloak instantly expanded rapidly, an invisible domain enveloping the entire island. In the Second Age, the giants mastered the entire God of War pathway, and their language was not initially created for communication between themselves, but for communicating with the world and mobilizing extraordinary abilities. It was itself a linguistic manifestation of the rules of a certain pathway. Therefore, even if there is no giant at this point in time, giant language can still be effective and can manipulate extraordinary items in adjacent death pathways to a limited extent. In the duty room, two wizards dressed as Aurors were chatting while eating sunflower seeds. You mean Harley Potter? Is she really coming? Who knows? Another Death Eater shrugged. If the Great Dark Lord thinks she'll come, then she definitely will. Besides, Dumbledore has been drawn to the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic by those weirdos, so there aren't many wizards left who can come to Azkaban to provide support. Death Eater, who spoke first, glanced at the sea and said, "Tisk tisk tisk, such big waves, I wonder when Harley Potter will arrive." Who cares? It's pretty comfortable here. Another person stuffed a handful of sunflower seeds, which had accumulated to about half a bowl, into their mouth, revealing an expression of enjoyment. We don't need to go in and get up close to those disgusting dementors. We just need to send a signal when Harley Potter arrives and then send each other a stupefied disguise. What an easy task. Neither of them spoke again. After a while, Death Eater, who had spoken last, couldn't resist the urge to continue and started the conversation again. Tell me, who exactly are those wizards who invaded the Department of Mysteries? I don't know them at all. Upon hearing this topic, his colleague sat up abruptly, his face showing a mixture of fear, lingering dread, and disgust. Don't mention them, don't talk to me about that stuff. Why? Is there some other explanation behind this? Just don't mention it, and besides, it's not even certain whether those things are wizards. Not wizard. What else could it be but wizard? A third voice suddenly rang out in the room. I'm also very curious, could you tell me more about it? K. Can't you understand human language? Upon hearing that the third voice wasn't that of his colleague, but rather a somewhat unfamiliar one, Death Eater instinctively swore. I've said it so many times, it's not wizard, do I even know what it is? His words suddenly caught in his throat. It was a sealed room, and the door hadn't made a sound. Where did the third sound come from? Before I could think any further, both Death Eaters were sent flying, crashing heavily into the ceiling before falling back down. They lay on the ground, seeing stars. One of them, who was still able to open his eyes, saw a beautiful girl in a white dress with a radiant smile. Lying on the ground, still so restless. Harley chuckled, her shoes instantly transforming into red high heels, which she stomped down hard. Ah! A shrill scream rang out. Despite being thrown around in a daze, Death Eater still unleashed its power, covering its eyes and screaming madly. Forget it, they're just a bunch of insignificant lackeys. Not worth wasting time on them. The high heels transformed into sharp daggers, easily healing the two people from the pain of their bones nearly falling apart. The black ring on Harley's left middle finger emitted a soft glow, pulling the two spirits into the ring. Let me see your secret, huh? In the memory of the previously enraged Death Eater, Harley witnessed an incredible scene. After Lord Voldemort partnered with that self-proclaimed saint, a group of allies joined him. As instructed by the Dark Lord, the Death Eaters are required to provide shelter and food for these strategic partners. During one of his deliveries, this Death Eater had the misfortune of witnessing firsthand the true identity of the person living in his house. Beneath that ordinary wizard's skin lies a monster whose appearance cannot be described in words. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 399. Revenge is the best revenge, resentment is the worst resentment, and the pain is excruciating. Those who frequently use dark arts to commit murder and arson in the HP world should be aware of a common fact. After committing murder, a certain crack will appear in a person's soul. And if these friends also frequently split their souls and create Horcruxes, they will definitely be very familiar with this kind of rift. After all, this kind of rift is a crucial prerequisite for the splitting of a soul. With this rift, coupled with specific incantations, it's possible to tear off a piece of the soul. Then, by combining it with various dark arts incantations and a vessel to hold the soul, a new Horcrux is created. Of course, some people may have doubts about this, such as whether splitting one's soul in this way will lead to a decline in one's magic skills. After all, the book does not record such content. Regarding this question, Riddle, a distinguished graduate of Hogwarts, firmly believes that true knowledge comes from practice. To fill this gap in the book on magic, he personally crafted 6 Horcruxes, and unintentionally created a 7th, ultimately completing this omission in the academic history of Horcruxes. Even if the soul is split many times, the wizard's strength will not be greatly affected. In fact, his dark arts skills may even be further improved by killing enough people and having enough evil intentions. But as for reason, their souls are already split, what reason do they need? How can they eat lychees? Their insane thoughts have already taken over the high ground of their brains. So it's normal for Lord Voldemort to do some unreasonable things often. He's lost his mind, so why would he set high standards and high requirements? Even so, finding a group of allies who are ostensibly wizards but are not human in essence is still a very explosive thing. Especially based on the profound impression in the soul of this Death Eater, the monster's appearance is indescribable, just one glance is enough to make it seem like a synonym for chaos, twistedness, and depravity. After Harley found the face in her memory, she also agreed with the Death Eater's point of view. Harley was even curious how Riddle had managed to find such a group of ugly monsters. Compared to them, Riddle could be considered dashing. Wizarding world isn't small, but it's not huge either. It's just a small place with a limited number of creatures. It's quite difficult for an entire group of ugly, non-human monsters to hide for a long time. But no matter how ugly or inhuman these monsters are, they are no longer relevant to him. Instead, they are fighting Professor Dumbledore in the Ministry of Magic, buying time for Lord Voldemort. So Harley temporarily put it out of his mind and strode straight into the depths of Azkaban. At this point, Azkaban had become a hellish place, filled with blood and corpses. Through the operations of the Pure Blood family, all the Aurors on duty during this period were pure blood. Wizards are not mixed-race wizards or wizards of Muggle origin. Now, these Aurors and the invading Death Eaters have naturally joined forces. They first released all the imprisoned Death Eaters and distributed ones to them. These prisoners, held at the very bottom of the prison, truly deserve to be called Lord Voldemort's most loyal Death Eaters. Even after Lord Voldemort disappeared, they remained loyal and willing to suffer together in prison. Upon their release from prison, their first act was to rush to Lord Voldemort's side and express their longing for the great Dark Lord. Lord Voldemort never liked hearing his men weeping in his arms, feeling it was a waste of time. But this time, he made an exception, which was quite unusual. After all, these were his most loyal subordinates, who were unwilling to betray him even after he lost power. If we don't appease these loyalists, are we going to reuse Malfoy, that opportunist? After expressing his unwavering loyalty and longing for his master, a massacre began immediately after his release from prison. The Death Eaters, along with the Dementors they had recruited, began a brutal massacre of other criminals imprisoned in Azkaban. Even when these criminals begged to join the Death Eaters and expressed their willingness to contribute to the Dark Lord's cause, the Death Eaters ignored them and continued to vent their violent emotions as they pleased. Unfortunately, there don't seem to be enough prisoners in the jail for them to kill. After all, wizards who are arrested for minor crimes, such as petty theft, playing pranks on muggles, or selling counterfeit products, are usually only sentenced to be locked up in solitary confinement cells under the Ministry of Magic for about 1 or 2 months before being released. Even if they are imprisoned in Azkaban, if their crimes are not particularly serious, they will be transferred to the Ministry of Magic during the month of Christmas, so that the prisoners can have a pleasant Christmas. Now, only the most deserving of death remain in Azkaban, but because Wizarding World has no death penalty, they are spared and imprisoned in Azkaban for life. After torturing a dark wizard sentenced to life imprisonment with multiple cutting spells, Bellatrix spat on the ground. "This is unbelievable," Bellatrix said viciously. "How come there are so few prisoners in such a large place as Azkaban? It doesn't seem to meet the Master's needs at all. Have you forgotten it's Christmas?" Luke Wood, who had also been imprisoned for a long time, threw another crucio. "Everyone's been taken away, where are you going to find them? Besides, so what if there aren't enough prisoners? Don't forget, the Master brought so many giants, werewolves, and goblins. The blood and lives of these lowly creatures may not be of high quality, but they are plentiful enough to satisfy the Master." "This makes me furious," Bellatrix said angrily, unleashing a killing curse that ended the sinful life of the Dark Wizard, whom she had tormented beyond recognition. Those lowly creatures, what right did they have to sacrifice their lives and participate in their Master's great cause? This is blasphemy. Blasphemy against the glory of our great Master. Why not use those pure-blood traitors from the Ministry of Magic who dared to disobey our Master's orders as sacrifices?" Seeing the frenzied Bellatrix, none of the Death Eaters dared to say a word. After all, her proposal involved his own interests. She was crazy, but he wasn't. Apart from a few prisoners who were still clinging to life and emitting low moans, all was silent. "Then why don't you personally offer your life to the great Dark Lord?" A voice suddenly rang out, especially clear in the silence. "Since all the Death Eaters were born into pure blood families and have noble bloodlines, wouldn't it be the best choice to give their blood to the Dark Lord as a sacrifice?" The Death Eater present immediately wanted to curse. They really knew how to rub salt in the wound. Most people who choose to join Death Eater are simply looking for a strong patron and want to rely on a powerful figure. Would you really give up your life? Even most Death Eaters who are willing to be locked up in Azkaban wouldn't make that choice. Seeing Bellatrix's eyes light up, as if she had thought of something, Rodolphus quickly and loudly refuted her. "Don't talk nonsense. We are noble pure blood. Only by living can we better dedicate our lives to the great Dark Lord and realize the value of our lives." "Is that so? But I think the greatest value of your lives is to die a painful death, isn't it?" A sudden sound of footsteps appeared at the end of the stone corridor. The footsteps were rhythmic, as if they were stepping on a drumbeat, and moved slowly forward according to a certain pattern. The Death Eaters, who had been imprisoned for a long time, finally realized that there was an intruder. Rodolphus raised his hand and threw a crucio at them. However, the light from the spell pierced through the air but failed to hit any target. "Are you looking for me?" A sweet voice rang in Rodolphus' ear. Rodolphus's body stiffened abruptly, feeling as if the person speaking was very close to him, as if they could grab his neck without even needing to straighten their arm. "But that's impossible. Behind me are those Death Eaters." Moreover, his wife and brother were among the crowd. Other Death Eaters might stab him in the back, but as long as he didn't betray the Dark Lord, Bellatrix and Rabban Stan would never abandon him. Moreover, if that voice belongs to the intruder, then who is the slow footsteps still approaching from in front of me? Rodolphus's muscles were tense. He moved his feet carefully, then suddenly ran forward a few steps, leaned against the wall, and threw a crucio with his backhand. Despite the pressure of life and death, and despite having not exercised for a long time, Rodolfo still managed to complete this series of movements in one smooth motion. But there was nothing behind him, nothing unusual. The footsteps had also disappeared, leaving only the other Death Eaters staring at him blankly. "Rodolphus, what's wrong with you?" Bellatrix asked impatiently. "Let's go, we're going to the next cell to spread the glory of the Dark Lord." "Didn't you hear that?" Rodolphus asked, his face filled with disbelief. That strange sound, and that series of footsteps. What was that sound? Dólokhov, who had previously looked down the corridor at the same time as Rodolphos, now looked puzzled. "Didn't we just finish killing someone and are on our way to the next cell? Have you been locked up for too long and lost your mind?" "Yes, there's no sound. Are you too excited because the Dark Lord is back? Did he hallucinate from killing people? He really is a piece of trash." The Death Eaters in front of them didn't open their mouths, but countless whispers suddenly rang out. Despite having a wall behind him, Rodolphus took several steps back, his eyes filled with terror. He didn't know where things went wrong, everything seemed normal, yet nothing seemed normal. "You didn't actually believe them, did you?" The voice that had sounded earlier suddenly reappeared in Rodolphus's ears. "You clearly heard the sound, how could it be a hallucination as they say? You believe it? You really believe it?" Rodolphus felt a sharp dagger licking his neck and slowly sliding down his spine. But his colleagues looked at him strangely, as if he were really being unreasonable or acting crazy. Moreover, when he actually reached behind him, he could only touch a solid wall and couldn't find any trace of any living creature. The lights at both ends of the corridor began to go out, one after another, rapidly extending towards the middle. One by one, the Death Eaters were swallowed by the darkness, and then they made no sound at all, as if they had never existed. Then the footsteps started again, and with each time the lights went out, the footsteps would rhythmically sound and move closer to him. Lumos. Rodolphus waved the wand in fear, but no light appeared. Darkness was closing in, and Rodolphus screamed frantically, "Lumos! Lumos! Lumos!" Nothing happened. He was only met with the Death Eaters staring at him like he was crazy, and his beloved wife and brother, Bellatrix and Labastan. They seemed oblivious to everything, only feeling that they had gone mad. In the end, even Bellatrix was swallowed by darkness, leaving only the magic lamp above Rodolphus's head still lit. "Turn on the light. Lumos, why won't you turn on the light?" Rodolphus became increasingly hysterical, his voice even sounding like he was about to cry. Suddenly, the wand in his hand fell to the ground. The man before them, so thin from being locked up in Azkaban for so long that his ribs were visible, also knelt down, covered his face with his hands, and burst into tears. "Don't leave me, no, Bella. Labastan, please, don't leave me." A figure slowly appeared in front of Rodolphus. Before he could even see who it was, he rushed forward, grabbed the figure's leg, and burst into tears. "Please, save me. Spare me. It was all the Dark Lord's order, Bella's idea. I knew nothing." Looking at the incoherent man before him, the figure chuckled softly, "Then take a look at who I am." Rodolphus obediently raised his head and saw only a familiar face. His expression became incredibly complex, a mixture of fear, despair, and disbelief. Rodolphus retreated repeatedly, bumping into the wall, yet still trying to retreat further. "Impossible," he roared hoarsely. "Frank Longbottom, how could it be you? Aren't you already insane? But it's us, what should we do?" Another figure emerged from the darkness. "Alice Longbottom." Rodolphus's voice was filled with despair, and a deathly silence enveloped the entire room. "It's a shame we're not Auror anymore," Frank sighed. "Yes, that means we don't have to obey Auror's demands and can torture those damned Death Eaters as we please." Alice shook her head, seemingly filled with regret. "Please, kill me, please, you can't." Before Rodolphus could finish speaking, Alice kicked him hard against the wall. "Why can't we?" Frank's voice was calm and even. "When Alice was pregnant, didn't you torment her in the same way? I don't like the unforgivable curse, nor do I want to violate my morals. But who told you to hurt my child? Heart-piercing and bone-scraping. ... Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 400 The Deaths of Fudge and Umbridge. It is well known that the Dark Lord is a man of his word. At this moment, all the Death Eaters were unknowingly pulled into the Black Knight magic mirror and suffered the same torment as Rodolphus. They heard footsteps in the corridor and tried to resist in various ways, but to no avail. The Death Eaters' companions also expressed their bewilderment at their behavior, looking at them as if they were crazy. In addition to the oppressive darkness created by the Black Knight magic mirror and the invasion of illusions, almost every Death Eater experienced immense mental stress, and their entire being was filled with various negative emotions. Then, the wizards and muggles who had been tortured to death by them would take turns to torture these Death Eaters, seeking revenge for their grievances. Some Death Eaters completely lost the will to resist, some tried to beg for mercy, and some were still able to pick up the wand and throw out one or two killing curses. But all of this was in vain. The Death Eaters, enemies, were completely unaffected by the killing curse. After all, they are the illusions buried deep in the hearts of these enemies, and also the Reapers who have crawled back from hell. As these Death Eaters left the Black Knight magic mirror one by one, lying half dead on the ground, a deep sense of despair permeated the entire prison, becoming the best material for Harley's promotion. Harley didn't want to waste her time on these useless people. Tough spider silk danced in the air, accompanied by gushing blood. The blood of these Death Eaters was quickly absorbed by the ground as soon as it hit the ground. Their souls seemed to be torn apart and devoured by unseen creatures, eventually becoming nourishment for some kind of ritual. Half of them are dead, that's about enough. Harley nimbly stepped over the corpses and walked deeper into Azkaban. That crazy woman's magic skills are not bad either. She actually managed to find the loophole I deliberately left for her and escaped. I wonder what kind of interesting expression Riddle will have after hearing her report. Suddenly, a faint cry for help rang out. Help me. A mangled, unrecognizable figure struggled to emerge from the pile of corpses, pleading with Harley using its last remaining strength. Save me, please. Harley looked at the determined wizard with great interest, and suddenly asked. If I'm not mistaken, you seem to be the dark wizard Gregory Dolphin who tortured and killed 3 Muggle children in an orphanage in 1979. Seeing the dark wizard's pupils dilate instantly, Harley couldn't help but laugh. It really is you. I've read the records about you. I must say, your improved transformation torture spell is truly exceptional. I really like it. I guess those children who were tortured to death back then probably kept wailing and begging for mercy from you, but you didn't hold back at all. And the way those children died before they died seemed far more tragic than what you look like now. As they spoke, a mass of darkness spread out and coalesced into the faces of the 3 children. No, please. Gorogri could no longer utter a single word, only letting out mournful whimpers. 3 transformation torture spells struck him, and new suffering descended upon him once more. Harley didn't linger and continued walking forward. Deep within Azkaban lies the area where the core Death Eaters were once imprisoned. The iron bars that had been separated to hold prisoners had now been completely destroyed. The underground cell suddenly became incredibly empty. Lord Voldemort sat in the very center of the room, gently wiping the wand in his hand. This wand had been with him for a long time. Even when Lord Voldemort was on the verge of death in the Potter family mansion, he couldn't bear to part with this wand when he fled. Not far behind him was a staircase leading down, its iron gate tightly locked, emanating powerful magical energy. 2 obese figures were leaning against a corner of the room. If you look closely, it's not hard to see that it's Cornelius Fudge, Minister, and Dolores Umbridge, Senior Deputy Minister. Unfortunately, the 2 of them were no longer as glorious as before. Instead, they looked like 2 stray dogs, covered in wounds and bound by various spells, unable to utter a single word. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Bellatrix's voice arrived before she did. Master, Great Master, just as you predicted, Harley Potter has invaded Azkaban. It's finally here. Upon hearing the news he had been waiting for, Lord Voldemort slowly stood up, his voice filled with joy. Bellatrix ran all the way to Lord Voldemort. She instinctively wanted to kneel down, but was held up by invisible hands. No need to kneel, Lord Voldemort's voice was incredibly gentle. You are my most loyal and valued follower, and you could even say you are my friend. How could I bear to make you kneel down? Upon hearing Lord Voldemort's words, tears welled up in Bellatrix's eyes again. Now tell me, what are the losses of my dear men? Lord Voldemort spoke softly, and a large snake slowly slithered out from behind him and lay down at Lord Voldemort's feet. Master, Bellatrix's face instantly turned furious at the mention of Death Eater, all traces of gentleness vanishing. I don't know about the other Death Eaters, but the trash like Rodolphus and Labastan who were with me were all ambushed by Potter with some unknown magic and were left behind. As expected, Lord Voldemort's expression didn't seem too angry. Harley Potter is the nemesis I predicted, and she certainly has the strength to go toe-to-toe with me. It's perfectly normal that you couldn't beat her when you were ambushed. Describe to me the magic she used before, I need to make some preparations. Bellatrix immediately described to her master everything she had encountered, including the inexplicable darkness, her suddenly strange colleagues, and the mudblood and pureblood traitors she had personally killed who emerged from the darkness. However, Bellatrix relentlessly poured killing curse into the darkness, eventually driving it back and allowing her to find a loophole in the magic and escape. Listening to his devout female follower's description, Lord Voldemort nodded thoughtfully. He raised his hand, and Bellatrix almost instinctively leaned in, voluntarily placing his head under Lord Voldemort's hand. "Well done, Bella." Lord Voldemort gently stroked Bellatrix's dirty, dry, and dull hair. "The information you've revealed is very important to me. Once I've successfully killed Harley Potter and Dumbledore and taken control of the entire wizarding world, I will certainly reward you. Rest for a bit now and recharge. We have another tough battle to fight soon." Bellatrix obediently nodded, without questioning Lord Voldemort's order, and quickly found a corner to sit down and rest. As time went on, more and more Death Eaters returned. Lord Voldemort was surprised to find that less than a quarter of the Death Eaters, whom he had thought were dead, were now actually half still alive. This was a gain that truly exceeded his expectations. Unfortunately, each Death Eater wore a look of lingering fear, their hearts filled with intense terror and despair, which would undoubtedly affect their fighting ability. However, Lord Voldemort didn't care. In his eyes, even if all the Death Eaters, including Bellatrix, were to perish in the end, he wouldn't feel any pain. His subordinates and servants were nothing more than cheap expendables that he could summon again at any time. As long as the plan can be completed, this sacrifice is nothing. After the last Death Eater stepped into this level of the prison, Lord Voldemort closed his eyes and sensed that there were no more dark marks in the rest of Azkaban. He paced slowly down the corridor, looking at his men. "Friends, my dearest friends," Lord Voldemort's voice was so tender that it made one want to kneel down and offer their loyalty. "Today is a day to celebrate, not just because it's Christmas Eve, but also because tomorrow is Christmas. More importantly, we have won back a large number of old friends today. These old friends are extremely loyal. Even after the Dark Lord lost his power and completely fell, they were unwilling to become lackeys of the Ministry of Magic and pure blood traitors. Instead, they were willing to go into Azkaban to endure suffering. I pay tribute to them, they are truly noble pure bloods. Wizard, my friend forever." Immediately, applause erupted within Death Eater. Regardless of what these thugs were thinking, their faces were filled with respect for their comrade. But after winning back these friends, we faced a new problem, which was Harley Potter. Harley was sitting on a half-broken stone pillar, legs crossed, listening with great interest to the conversation below. It must be said that Lord Voldemort truly has a talent for making grand promises and exaggerating. Even if he lived in the Muggle world without any magic, he would probably still live a good life. Our allies are still fighting in the Ministry of Magic, keeping Dumbledore and the other idiots of the Order of the Phoenix occupied. So Azkaban is quiet, and no one can bother us except that damn Harley Potter." Lord Voldemort waved his hand dismissively. "How much trouble can a frail little witch like her cause? Do we noble pure bloods fear a girl who hasn't even reached adulthood yet? Therefore, our plan will surely succeed tonight. I will kill the enemy I foretold, proving to you that the prophecy was false, and at the same time share with you the greatest secret of this Azkaban. At that time, my dear friends, we will all gain eternal life amidst the cries and blood of the enemy." Lord Voldemort's serpentine face, with only two narrow nostrils, beamed with a radiant smile. He stretched out his arms as if to embrace the Death Eater before him. The Death Eaters below were also incredibly enthusiastic, wishing they could kneel down at Lord Voldemort's feet and kiss his shoes. Only Harley noticed the snake-like coldness and cruelty in Lord Voldemort's eyes. It's likely that the Death Eater below, and indeed every living creature in the entire Azkaban, is now seen as a sacrifice to be made at any time. And now, let us invite our old friend, the dear Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, and his loyal subordinate, the Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic, Dolores Umbridge. The two fat men, who had been lying in the corner and curled up in fear, flew up and landed at Lord Voldemort's feet. "These two leaders of the Ministry of Magic are our sacrifices before tonight's battle, symbolizing that we will overthrow the current erroneous rule and change the status quo where the Mudbloods are on equal footing with us." Lord Voldemort gracefully waved his wand, dispelling the magic that had silenced the two. "Since you two have been invited to our gathering tonight, is there anything you'd like to say to everyone?" Fudge was usually very arrogant and even dared to swagger around Professor Dumbledore, sometimes even slamming his fist on the table and yelling at him. But now, facing this mob, he finally understood that the weapon of criticism cannot replace the criticism of weapons. Fudge trembled with fear, his teeth chattering. A splashing sound rang out, and a stream of yellow liquid trickled outwards. He was so frightened that he lost control of his bladder. The Death Eaters below noticed this and immediately burst into laughter and howls. On the contrary, Umbridge, a ruthless man who had climbed his way up from the very bottom, began to plead loudly. "Master, Master, I am your devout follower, Master. I am so loyal to you. But the noble Dark Lord has no need for your loyalty. Your loyalty, you bastard, is worthless to me. Lord Voldemort replied coldly, then looked down at Death Eater. I want to share an interesting story with you, a story that was told to me by the head of the Bart family of the Selwyn family. Our dear guest of the banquet, Ms. Umbridge, has always claimed to be related to several pure-blood families, especially the Selwyn family. A murmur arose from below, causing Nagini to shake her head uneasily. Lord Voldemort patiently waited until the Death Eaters had finished their discussion before continuing his narration. But in reality, there is no Ms. Umbridge on the Selwyn family genealogy. That's right, she's a shameless thief, a despicable petty thief, a vile impostor. Her father was the old Umbridge who swept the floors in the Ministry of Magic, her mother was the dirty Muggle, and her brother was the disgraceful Squib. But Umbridge deliberately concealed her identity and expelled these people from the wizarding world, so that others would no longer notice the muddy blood flowing in her veins. At the same time, she also attempted to establish a relationship with the noble pure bloods, wanting to steal their glory. Upon hearing this, the fervent supporters of the theory of bloodline erupted in cheers and curses once again. Do you think you are qualified to pledge allegiance to me? Lord Voldemort looked at the toad at his feet. If you were a mixed-race wizard, considering that you might also have traces of pure blood on you, I could still allow you to exist. But you actually dared to attempt to steal the glory of the noblest pure blood in the world, alas. But Master, Umbridge pleaded, unwilling to give up any hope of survival. You promised me, you said you would bestow upon me unparalleled glory, and that my name would be forever remembered. That's right. Lord Voldemort nodded lazily. As everyone knows, the Dark Lord is always very trustworthy and keeps his promises. But all I promised you was that your name would be remembered forever. I didn't guarantee you'd live, did I? Isn't being a sacrifice for Lord Voldemort's great cause a way to be remembered forever? Seeing Umbridge's deathly pale face, Lord Voldemort shook his head and gently waved his wand. Suddenly, an altar rose up in front of him. Fudge and Umbridge were thrown heavily onto the altar, landing in a daze. The invisible ropes binding them were untied, but the two were powerless to escape, for death loomed over them. Harley Potter should be arriving soon, Lord Voldemort said softly, tilting his head. Then please, ministers, proceed on your way. The wand kept striking in the air, drawing strange marks. As the incantation was chanted, a great current of energy surged from the altar, engulfing Fudge and Umbridge. Nagini seemed to sense something and hissed uneasily. Death has descended upon this altar. ... Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.